1st, 2015, and the first item is adjustments to the agenda. Any adjustments to the agenda? I would like to note for commissioners that we will have executive session today at the end of the meeting, and there is a 10:30 time certain item on the agenda, so we'll have to juggle if we need to. No further adjustments to the agenda. Are there any public comments today? And no, I don't see anyone that looks like they're here to address us, so we'll move on. Any commissioners' response to public comments and or other remonstrance? Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I obviously don't have any response to public comment, but I want to take just a moment and share the event that took place last night in Cottage Grove. As I think each of you know, I've been kind of dabbling with building a park, and last night we had our first large event at the facility. It was the Eugene Symphony, and it was incredible. We probably had over 2,500 people there. It was a packed house, and I would share just a brief second of what it sounded like. It was an incredible evening. Couldn't ask for anything better. So I'll try to let you guys know ahead of time when there'll be another one, and hopefully you can get down and enjoy it.
And I just noticed somebody walk in, looked like they were signing up for public comment, and even though we breezed right past that today with the indulgence of the board, I'm going to jump backwards to public comment and give Wayne Martin an opportunity to come up and address us. So, Mr. Martin, if you'll state your name and where you're from for the record, and then you'll have your 3 minutes.
I'm Reverend Wayne Martin, retired pastor, and an advocate for people who are still looking for a place to live. Not long ago, probably in early November, I spoke with Commissioner Farr about our need to find adequate space to proceed with our ideal, which was a health sanctuary for people that needed mutual support and the support of the medical establishment. And he was gracious enough to start looking and spoke with you, you may remember, and I am really indebted. As you probably know, because of football season, we need to make a move. And I would like it if you would consider, and then reconsider after you first consider, talking with the folks at the fairgrounds, those people that would be appropriate. We feel as though 20 or so folks, 15 or so folks could be useful to the county by providing 24-hour surveillance and protection, not in a professional sense, we know you have that, but in an extra eyes sense, and the capacity to even help the work crews and the other assignments that may come up from time to time to clear debris or to prepare a place. It's an unprecedented way to partner with the homeless community. You'll note that there have been no police reports whatsoever at all in the 8 months that they've been there. It's astonishingly successful, and you deserve some credit for that. So I just wish to ask you to, as you did 8 months ago, think beyond the box, not so much outside it. Stretch the box and see if one of two sites would accommodate perhaps 10 to 15 tents for the next 3 months. Then we can possibly renegotiate moving the site back to its original location. I hope I was clear, and if I wasn't, please ask me. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see we have one more person that just walked in. If you'll come up to the podium and state your name and where you're from for the record, and then I'll start your 3 minutes.
We take them so early, so I'm not totally prepared here. Usually there's a sheet out and there's a little time to prepare. My name's Sandy Mann. I live at 306 F Street in Springfield, Oregon, number 5, 97477. I have comments on International Paper, the 3-year tax waiver that they requested. I went to the Springfield City Council meeting last night, and Marilee Woodrow proposed not only a 3-year tax waiver, but a 5-year tax waiver, which would amount to, I did the math, like I said, usually I have time to sign up and prepare, so I'm caught unaware, but it now comes to $11 million. I'm just speechless. I think the vote was decided before they even came into City Council chambers because there was no discussion, no questions for International Paper. I was the only one that spoke against it. I asked for the vote to be delayed until a study could be done on the effects of the effects of health on people that lived in the area in Lane County. I myself suffer from extreme asthma problems and allergy made worse in the winter by inversions coming from International Paper. I have to run from my condo to the car. I cannot stay outside. If you listen to the weather reports, you know that people are supposed to stay inside on days like that. I sub in the public schools. I live in the Washburn district where the water is fine, but if you taste the water out in the public schools closer to International Paper, it's horrible. I'd like to see a study done, and I ask that you delay the vote until that's done. I've been doing a lot of research myself, and I have data from some of these sources already. I'd be happy to do a study for a nominal fee. I've been a research assistant in the past. I was just, like I said, appalled at the way the vote went last night. Like I said, I think it was a done deal. A lot of the questions they had for another issue, cell tower, they asked questions. You know, they thought about compromising. With this vote, no questions. Who was it? Councilmember Moore just sat there and praised International Paper for being a member of the community and hiring people. I don't know what kind of a deal this is going to be for me. I've lost $15,000 on my condo since the bottom dropped out of the economy. My property taxes were $1,500 last year. You've heard me before. I made $20,300 some last year on a master's degree. I asked them where they're going to make the money, where they're going to get the money to make up the shortfall for this. They didn't answer my question. My guess is it's going to come from raising the property tax. If that's so, I'm going to leave Springfield. You know, I can't live in an area like this where I can't breathe. Maybe I'll leave Lane County if you vote for this. I'd like you to vote for the people. I'd like you to delay the vote on International Paper until a study is done. I hope you would do the right thing and do that. Unfortunately, I'm probably the only person speaking. I've contacted a lot of people about this issue. I think it's really important about the quality of the air and the water, but nobody's taking a look at that, and nobody seems to care. Yeah, I could die. People die from asthma attacks. Their vote last night sent me a signal that they don't care. They don't care about my health and whether I die or not. I care. You know, if I have to move, I know. If I have to move out of the country, maybe Sweden's a better deal for me. Maybe that's where I belong. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wanted to address the board this morning? Seeing and hearing none, then we'll move back to Commissioner's response to public comment and or other remonstrance. Any other commissioners wish to speak? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. interesting that Reverend Martin had a few words to say about the Nightingale Health Sanctuary. And I just wanted to point out, Mr. Mokrajewski, that he did say that we talked about it initially in November, but I'd mentioned it to you and to Ms. Hayes, and you guys did the work on finding the place for the sanctuary and made it happen. It has been very successful against what many people thought might happen. You know, when the city of Eugene first opened a rest stop, I was a little skeptical myself. I thought it was just I didn't know what it would evolve into. But both of the rest stops, the ones in Eugene and the one that we have been on, the one that's on county land currently on MLK Boulevard, have both been successful. The intent of the rest stops is to help people move through homelessness, to step through homelessness into permanent residences. And the MLK facility, the Nightingale Health Sanctuary, has provided 17 move-throughs for people during its time of operation. It's been successful getting people off the street and into housing. And I think you and I have talked, and I know each of the commissioners have considered what is the next step for what are we going to do. We know that middle of August, the Nightingale facility will be moving along. And that was intended from the beginning. In fact, the sunset date was extended for a couple of months. So I think it's a conversation that we will have, and Reverend Martin left a few moments ago, but reassure him that the conversation is ongoing, and that the people who have been receiving health care and a place to sleep at night there have not been forgotten, and will be continuing to discuss what is the next step and how do we move forward. But he mentioned my name, and really I want to defer all of that, Mr. Mokrajewski. You and staff made that happen. It was a great team effort between the county, the city of Eugene, and Nightingale, the nonprofit provider. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just received this notice. This is actually from the NACO Transportation Steering Committee. So today at 11:30 our time, the U.S. Senate will be voting on actually the vote will not be on the package, but the vote will be on to actually begin the debate of a 6-year reauthorization of MAP 21. And the House has already voted on a extension through December 18th, which allows them to begin the process of also considering a 6 year. So at this point in time, I'm not sure what the House would do if the Senate moved forward on a 6 year, but what I will say is it's very bipartisan. In fact, on the House extension, the vote was 312 to 119. So it was a bipartisan vote. The Senate today, in order to move forward on to debate the action, they'll need 60 votes. And according to the information here, it looks like they clearly have the 60 votes. So it's a bipartisan effort. So while our state legislature couldn't get a transportation package done, it looks like Congress may get a package done by the end of this year, and which is very exciting. These are some major, especially in the infrastructure, this is some things that we need. And I think you all saw, hopefully you all saw the collapse of the bridge there on I-10 in California, which is a main thoroughfare leading into Arizona because of flooding. And so that part of the Interstate 10 is now actually blocked off. People are going to have to detour to figure out how to get from the major thoroughfare from California to Arizona. And so this is really needed. So I want to applaud both sides back in D.C. on considering moving forward on and again, it's a 6 year is what they're looking at. So actually very exciting progress. Stay tuned. But this is something that just came 8:56 a.m. So just a little over almost 20 minutes ago. So so stay tuned.
Thank you. Any further remonstrance? Then I'd like to spend a minute and address a couple items that came up in public comment. I'd like to thank Reverend Martin for coming in. The partnership with Nightingale on the rest stop has been a really productive one and helped a lot of people out. But I would like to warn my colleagues and staff as they look at alternative sites to remember how those sites were funded and the intention of the funding. And with the Lane Event Center, a majority of the funding for capital improvements and even some operations has come through transient room tax. and I'm not sure a rest stop would meet the intent of transient room tax funded programs, where it's all about getting people to stay and be tourists in Lane County. We had the same issue when there was a rest stop that was set up within county road right-of-way, where it's funded by road taxes, which are not allowed to be used for anything other than roads. So it's one of the issues we have to think about is how are we legally allowed to use property. Fortunately, we were able to come to an agreement on that temporary rest stops, the 2 temporary rest stops next to mental health, but we'll see, what we work out in the future. The other thing I'd like to address is the inaccurate characterization that a property tax enterprise zone is somehow going to create a shortfall. What it actually does is just delays when taxes are going to start happening on some kind of improvement relative, and that improvement's not here today. So we're not taxing anything today. That is not something that we are currently getting revenue on that we're not going to get revenue on if we were to vote for the enterprise zone. So there's no shortfall. In fact, what we're hoping to do is encourage somebody to invest a significant amount of money, increase jobs, which generally increases our tax revenues, and also after a certain number of years, that improvement comes on our tax books and we get a net gain. So somehow or another that a property tax waiver for a period of time on something that isn't here yet is a shortfall is completely inaccurate. So with that, is there any other further remonstrance? Seeing none, we'll move on. Is there any emergency business today?
There's none.
Then we'll move to consent calendar, and these are items that are considered routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted by one motion, and it will have no discussion on the motion. There was opportunity to pull items off earlier in the meeting, and if anyone wants to see details on what we're passing, it's on our website, and you can click on View Material for those details. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to Health and Human Services, item 6A, order 1507-2104, in the matter of awarding and accepting contracts and amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign and approve contracts and amendments in the Department of Health and Human Services. And it looks like we have Karen Gaffney, so I'll hand it over to you.
Morning, Chair Bozovich and Commissioners. I'm going to do a very brief introduction and then turn it over to Debbie Hiesel, who's lead in our contracts unit. I know we've been here before with contract lists, and this morning when I looked at the item, we have 61 items to be approved today. I think for me, the piece I wanted to underscore is really how much of Health and Human Services work is really done through partnerships in the community, and that's what these contracts represent for us, is our formalized partnerships both on the revenue side and in the service delivery side in how we do our work. So I'll let Debbie talk about the package in particular.
As Karen indicated, we have 61 contracts and amendments before you. The bulk of these are amendments. They're ongoing services that have been provided by partners in the community for behavioral health services, poverty and homeless services, and public health services. They're contracts that have already been approved and we're just extending. We have 3 new contracts in front of you. One of them is for dispensing of 340B medications for clients in the community health center. One of them is a revenue agreement with the state of Oregon for AIM High. The AIM High program is the funding transitions behavioral health clients out of the state hospital and facilities into lower levels of care. And one of them is with shelter care for client-specific services provided at Garden Place.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So these increases, are they the results of legislative action, or, I mean, most of them are health care increases, and they're huge. I mean, we're talking about $1.5 million for services through Trillium, $1.4 million increase to Willamette Family for alcohol and drug treatment. Just roughly where are the sources that are seeing these big boosts?
Much of this comes from the state. It's our ongoing agreements to provide behavioral health services and poverty and homeless services in the community. The Trillium increases are again, through the CCO contract and funding that comes in for services that are provided at our community health centers.
And many of these amendments that add dollars also add time. So, for instance, we're adding a year additional service to Trillium, so there's going to be revenue that comes in that year. The same is true with several of the expense addendums. It's this year's fiscal year's worth of money.
For ongoing 15-16 funding for these organizations.
Yeah, and I just wanted to state that, this is incredible and huge, just let alone for Southland Mental Health. It looks like they're going to see close to $300,000 worth of increase, almost doubling a couple of the contracts we have with them. And, for folks that aren't familiar with somebody like Southland Mental Health or others, they stretch those dollars incredibly far and serve a huge amount of people. And so I'm very confident that these new funds are going to be able to help that much more in our community. So just wanted to make a few statements that these contracts are going to provide some great services. Thanks.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. I'd like to point out, Chair Bozovich, something that you talked about a little bit last Friday at the City Club, and that is how Lane County is in partnership in many elements of government with the state. Much of the money that we spend comes through the state, and it's our job to allocate it and to spend it wisely, but it does come from the state. And Commissioner Bozovich very eloquently last Friday stated how, and showed a chart regarding how we are in partnership with the state. This is an illustration of that, and a lot of folks don't fully understand that we have a relatively large overall budget, but much of the budget is pass-through money that we once again allocate and once again are responsible to spend wisely, but it is money that we really have to spend it on the things that it came for. You mentioned the contract with our coordinated care organization, which we contract with Trillium, and there are 16 CCOs throughout the state. All receive they all have contracts with the counties or the regions of counties, and just one of the many ways that we wisely, once again, allocate and spend state money. And the last time that you were here, I said, I'll bet more than a few minutes' work went into these contracts, even though it's just a few minutes that we talk about them. And really thank you for the depth of work that you and your staff go into to put these things before us. Just all we have to do is say aye, and you spend months getting this thing in place, so thank you very much.
And our partners spend the entire year providing the services. So it really is a great partnership all the way from the state through the community partners.
Commissioner Sorensen.
When it comes to these contracts and the wide array of them and the large number of them, what is your what efforts are made to invite people to submit bids? In other words, it's a difficult thing because there's only one Trillium in Lane County, yet we're inviting contracts. How can we make the process so that people can in fact bid on them?
We run request for proposal processes on a regular basis for the services that are provided in the community, and we advertise those on the web page. We send them out to Human Services listservs, so we try to get that information out as much as possible. Anyone who's indicated an interest in providing services in Lane County is put on a list. They get copies of all of our RFP notices. So we do go out to bid, and there are services that sometimes are provided by one provider, and then through the RFP process they're provided by another provider. That does happen, but we do go back out to the community on a regular basis, open the competitive selection process up, and give the opportunity for people to bid on services or talk about creative services that they would provide with these funds to get to the outcomes that we're trying to get to.
And Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Sorens, I would add to that piece, in addition to that upfront work to make sure that we're transparent and everyone has an opportunity, all qualified bidders have an opportunity. The other piece that I will take the opportunity to remind the public about is each of these contracts, once they're put in place, also represents a lot of work in terms of accountability. So we will absolutely not just write the check and walk away, but we really do have strong contracts with these agencies. We have regular reporting from them. We do site visits, monitor closely how they use those funds to make sure that we're really getting the services that we need in the community.
Thank you.
Commissioner Light.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So question I have is actually around Trillium. So it's listed as a contractor, but yet the state just approved the purchase of Centene of Trillium. So is it still Trillium? Or is it a DBA? Is it a subsidiary? Or how is this working?
Thank you. Chair Bozovich and Commissioner Lykin, today it is still Trillium, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Agate. So that deal is likely to close at the end of August, is the latest prediction. But even when that happens, Trillium will still be Trillium. They're their own corporation. They're just wholly owned. It will be Centene at that time.
That's what I was wondering, if that was going to be the case. So Centene, in a sense, is the umbrella. And then,
right, they're the one shareholder.
Yeah, and they own many other. So I just because it says contractor, and just want to make sure that it's all. And Beans, I know you went through this with legal, and so I'm sure we're all in good shape. So I'm looking out there and seeing Mr. Dingle, and I'm sure we are in good shape. So, all right, so that answers my question. It's just. It's been in not only the news, but I think we've been briefed on it as well, and just want to make sure that everything is kosher here. So, okay, very good. Thank you.
So I have one quick question relative to the Affordable Care Act and these contracts. A lot of them have increased a lot because we've gotten such a large enrollment in the Oregon Health Plan through the Affordable Care Act. And particularly some of the services that weren't previously eligible for reimbursement now are, and particularly in some of the mental health and the addiction treatment. For instance, detox is now eligible for reimbursement. So a lot of that's being reimbursed now, and that's why a lot of these contracts are pretty big that we're rolling over. It's really to pass through federal money through the state and basically Medicaid. There is a upcoming change in that level of reimbursement over time. Do you have any, looking forward past this year, do you have anything, any concerns about the state's ability to make up for the reduction in federal reimbursement, the percentage reimbursement, where the state will have to start making up some of that?
Chair Bozovich, of course, I always have concerns. However, they're tempered by a few things. As the state has been looking at making up their match, they have been budgeting significantly around the benefits from healthcare transformation. So to the extent that they can drive down healthcare costs in other parts of the system, then that is freeing up other general fund dollars that would be available to pay the increased match over time for new enrollees. So I think that plan is a solid one. Looking at the early successes, it does seem like we're able to generate savings at the state level, and so those funds will be available as we move forward. That money then goes, for the Medicaid side, the Oregon Health Plan will go to Trillium, and as you know, the county's very invested in the success of Trillium too. So we're also watching it at that table to make sure that at a CCO level we're generating enough savings so that we're going to be able to have a solid provider system in our community. So I think it's important to track on it because it will be critical moving forward, and I think we're on a good path.
And I'd like to add, most of these contracts are actually not Medicaid. Most of the contracts that come to the county are for indigent clients. And so the Medicaid money, Trillium contracts with their provider panel to pay the OHP fee for service. And these are funds that what the state knows is there still are going to be people who are not eligible for Medicaid who still need services. And those are primarily what Lane County contracts for.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Is there a motion to approve the order? Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of Order 15-07-21-4 in the matter of awarding and accepting contracts and amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved contracts and amendments in the Department of Health and Human Services.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to County Council. Item 7A, announcements. And while Mr. Dingle's walking up, I will remind folks we do have need for executive session today.
No announcements, Chair.
Okay, so then we will move on to item 7B, which is a report back on emergency declarations procedures. And we have Mr. Dingle and Linda Cook from our emergency manager. And I'll turn it over to you all.
Chair Bozovich and members of the board, you'll recall that back on June 2nd, we met for a work session to discuss various aspects of emergency preparedness. I've sent the materials that were posted include a memo from me dated June 30th, 2015. I've tried to set up, if you will, a series of decision points for the board with some draft board orders for you to consider. You'll notice that, not coincidentally, the first item under the decision point deals with Ms. Cook, and that was to make sure that the orders and the things that you're doing around delegation of authority to the county administrator and your meeting things, your meeting rules and those sorts of things don't conflict with the existing emergency operation plan. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Cook, at least on that point to start with, which is the number one. These things conflict with the... Well, she's looking at that. I just want to remind you, I think we decided that it didn't because really there were two different things. Primarily the authority that you were considering delegating to the county administrator was the allocation of resources. It wasn't necessarily decision-making, so that I think the idea was that would not conflict with whatever the existing chain of command was within the already approved emergency operation plan, if that makes sense to folks. Really, I think it would just be that Ms. Cook or whoever the decision maker was would be going to Mr. Korporahiski and asking for those resources. And this was to make sure that later on down the decision point was to make sure that you had vested in him and delegated in him the authority to expend those resources so that no one could later claim he exceeded his authority.
And I concur and I agree that that is correct. There is no conflict with the emergency operations plan. But I do want to also offer that we are in the process of, and I'll be talking about this in a few moments, updating our emergency operations plan. And so if anything, the work that you're doing today will enhance what our plan says. So I will be incorporating parts of what gets discussed today into the new revised plan.
Excellent. Here.
My copy here. So the next item that is up for you to consider is the 476-280 declaration, and this is the one we talked about where this gives advance authority to fire districts in unincorporated Lane County to respond and extinguish fires and bill the landowner for the cost of it. This is a procedure that's permitted by statute. It's very simple, and the board order that you have in front of you as a draft is the very first one. It has obviously the PDF. The actual order would include the map of the fire districts, but this essentially just tracks the statute. And you'll see in here that it mentioned in the discussion part that I'm sure we can depend on Ms. Cook to notify the appropriate districts that such a finding or permission has been granted. Anyone has any questions about that one? But I recommend that's one that we can do in advance where we can fill it completely out, in contrast to the next item, which is we can't completely do that because we don't know all of the details about the configuration, so you can't really pass that in advance.
Commissioner Stewart.
I guess that you just spoke a little bit to what my question was going to be, Mr. Dingle, that in my understanding of meeting with the Coburg Fire Chief on this matter, that really they kind of happened very quickly, and it's the fire district that has to initiate it. So this, by taking this action, it speeds up our process to agree with that request, and hopefully get boots and equipment on the ground as soon as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, and I think, and Ms. Cook can jump in here, but when I looked at the statute and a little bit of the history, the idea was, let's say there's a small, like a small grass fire or something that's in unincorporated Lane County. This allows, technically, this fire district would be outside its jurisdiction or whatever. It could go do that. It would act with authority, and then they can go back and build the homeowner, as opposed to calling and trying to find out, will you grant us authority to put this out, et cetera, where it could theoretically spread.
That was my understanding a year ago when they had the fire up Deception Creek, and we had those homes in the Leduc area. It could have very quickly gotten to a request for that conflagration and being able to move that. So those things do happen, and we just need to be prepared. And I guess my next question would be, Mr. Dingle, is do you want to take action on these separately, or is it intended to be whole?
What I'd intended, Commissioner Stewart, was to get direction, because you'll notice that these are in a draft form, so you discuss, and then what I would anticipate is that I would bring back to you a formal board order adopting it. And the other thing I wanted to point out is I've tried to be flexible with all these, so you'll notice that because we discussed in our work session, and I think Ms. Cook concurs with this, the idea that we set as a regular process sometime in January, reviewing all of these sort of related emergency board orders to make sure that they're consistent, that there haven't been any statutory changes, and to the extent that they name specific individuals, that we make sure that the right current individual is in the board order. So all of them, and I've also included within the idea that even if we don't happen to meet, that they will still have continuing validity, and that's just sort of a backstop provision that I put in there at 8 to C. I'm confident with Outlook we can calendar this to where we don't lose them, but if we did by some chance, we wouldn't have all of our emergency orders drop off the table, if you will. So I don't want to bring that up, because I've done that throughout wherever I could with the emergency board orders. But the idea would be that we would discuss them at least once a year in January. Thanks.
Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that also includes potentially major fires at a mill in an urban area where, especially when you have several alarms and you have districts from all over the area responding to that fire, not just I guess the Eugene Springfield Fire and Life Safety Now, but not just the local, but you had districts from all over. I remember traveling up north and seeing fire trucks and firefighters coming from the north, coming down to help with that. I don't know how many alarms that fire was, but it's pretty significant. The other is, I think the more that we can have the cooperating work that we do with all of our jurisdictions, I think the better off we are going to be, especially with the fact that I think that we're going to continue to be challenged with our resources, and so I really appreciate, this is the part I really appreciate as much as anything, that as long as we have in place, I think where you have, and sometimes it's not a single, but you have somebody who, in a sense, is in charge, for lack of a better word. I think that that's very helpful. But I remember, I think it was last summer, myself and Gary Ross from Willamette Park and Recreation District, we happened to be in the same area, and there was a fire actually up on Mountain Gate, and had just started. But the first to respond was ODFW. Greg Wagenblast just happened to be driving by and saw the smoke and called it in, and then the local Eugene Springfield Fire and Life Safety also came. So it was a great coordination. I mean, that was fun to watch, to be honest with you. It was such good coordination. So I really appreciate, this is really good work, and thank you very much for putting this together. So I can't thank you enough. Linda, you're a real gem to me, and from my perspective here at Lane County, and I just remember earlier this year when I was over at the Armory, and we were talking when Senator Wyden was in town. This was clear back in March, talking about the fire issue, and your name comes up, and it's great to hear all of our partners, whether it's state and federal, know exactly who Linda Cook is. It says a lot, not only about yourself, but I think about Lane County as a whole. So thank you very much for your work.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Mr. Dingell and Ms. Cook, thank you for bringing this item back to us at our request. You know, it's everybody has concerns about what happens if we have an earthquake, what happens if we have a tsunami on the coast, forest wildfires. Wildfires are more likely than the other eventualities, but the other eventualities might happen. You know, about a year ago, I received a phone call in the middle of the night from Sheriff Turner, and he was asking me if I could give him authority to open our forest work camp, which was at the time mothballed, in order for the firefighters to stage their central operation right on our facility. Well, I didn't think twice before I said yes. Should have thought twice, as it turns out, because I wasn't a part of the emergency plan on that. However, if the question came to me again at the same time of night, I would still say the same thing: go ahead and open it. I'll take the flag later. But what you have done, not just in response to that, but in response to other potential emergencies that are right now at the forefront of a lot of people's mind, you're updating our plan on a regular basis. You're making sure the plan works for the organization, works for the county, and most significantly, if a curveball gets thrown at us that we likely would not have expected, we are doing our best to expect it. We're putting in item 3 on the background, it says create a template and fill in as many of the blanks as possible in advance. Well, to me, that's the beauty of this, is filling in the blanks so that we don't have to shoot from the hip, so to speak, when we get the questions in the middle of the night, so that we know exactly what the order, the progression, the order of command, so to speak, in terms of reallocating our resources. A lot of work's gone into this, and you know, Commissioner Lycan just mentioned that your name is known throughout, I don't know, the region, the state, because you really are professional. You've done a great job of working through the years with this. But I wanted to point out something that happened yesterday. I was talking to Diana Jones in her office, and we were talking about a couple of things, catching up on a couple of things that were moving and relatively important that we speak about at the time, and her phone rang. And normally she says, oh, I'll get that later. And she looked and said, oh, it's Linda Cook, which means get out of here. So I got out of there and let her talk probably about about the presentation today. But I feel a great deal of confidence in the fact that you're on the job and that you're making certain that the blanks are indeed filled in, so that if something does happen in the middle of the night or the middle of the day, you know, that we know what to do, and there's a plan in place. We had a emergency preparedness meeting. We were kind of the tail end of what the entire staff had been doing a couple of weeks ago, and we were brought down to be the command center in this case it was a school lockdown. But you know, the command structure for whatever the emergency may be is relatively similar. And recently there's been an article published in the New York Times that's got a lot of people thinking, whoa, boy, I better put water in the garage. And in fact, you know, people should put water in the garage, but at all times we are prepared. And by looking at it annually, as you are doing, and by looking at it on a regular basis and making sure that all the blanks are filled in, I feel confident that in the eventuality of something horrific, something unthinkable, we're prepared to respond to the best of our ability. And thank you very much for being on the job. Thanks for bringing this before us today.
So bringing us back to where we are on this particular item, is there any concern about having a board order come back that would grant authority to fire districts to fight fires in unprotected zones of Lane County? That's what we're at right now in the discussion. Commissioner Sorensen.
Yeah, thank you for zeroing in on that. Is there any difficulty in terms of the efforts of fire districts to acquire additional and adjacent areas for their districts? In other words, if the fire district can put the fire out in the adjacent area, is there ever any incentive for the people in the adjacent unincorporated and in an area that's not in a fire district to then join that fire district? And similarly, couldn't areas that are currently in fire districts try to get out of fire districts if the authority was there to put fires out outside of their districts? How do we reconcile the concept of the need for the district and the taxation within the district to support the district's operations? Could Eugene get out of the fire district and have Springfield pay for all of our fires? Just a question.
Yeah, and it's a good question. The thought that comes to mind when I hear how you're framing your question is that people who live in areas that are unprotected typically know that and are choosing to not be a part of a district. I would imagine that if they wanted services, they could go to the nearest fire district and work something out. I am not a subject matter expert on that issue in particular. So we just assume that some people live in unprotected areas knowingly, and therefore it defaults to the county to decide whether or not we're going to assist in some way to bring fire protection to those unprotected areas, because it's not within the responsibility of the adjacent fire district to provide that. And, I think it's kind of a toss-up. I think there are some fire chiefs that say it would not be worth the public relations nightmare to not go ahead and protect a house just because it's 100 feet outside of my jurisdiction. Others might take a different stance and say they're not a taxpayer, I'm not going to do it. So we don't know how the local fire chief will respond. And so what we're doing today is we're putting something in place for the county to act very quickly and be able to communicate that to the responding fire chief. We'd like to contract with you on an ad hoc basis right now to protect those properties.
Well, could we put a lien on their property? I get it that it would be an extreme example to say, well, the property is adjacent to the district or 100 feet outside the district, so therefore we're not going to put the fire out. I would draw a distinction between that and we are going to put the fire out under authority that the Board of Commissioners has granted, and we're going to require that the property owner reimburse the fire district for the cost so that the property owner then doesn't get something for free. Right. And that's my concern, is that the people in the district, including my 71,000 constituents, should not be in a position of subsidizing the work. Now, I have no problem with the fire district providing that service, but I have a big problem with them saying, oh, well, it's outside the district, so therefore we're going to put the fire out, and we're going to put it out under the same conditions that we would put the fire out in the district. To me, that doesn't seem fair. And maybe that's something Mr. Dingell can work on when he's working up this paper, because it seems to me that we, at least speaking for myself, I do like the idea of us being able to deploy these resources of these cities and districts to put out fires outside of their districts. I do like that idea, but I'm a little nervous about this idea of saying we're going to put them out on the same basis that we're putting out fires within cities and within districts.
If I can, Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, that's not what this does. What this does is it gives the fire district the authority. You're delegating authority to the fire district to go out and suppress the fire. The fire district bills the landowner for the cost of it. And presumably they would have all of the usual means of collection of any public body. All this does is it eliminates the argument from the landowner that says you acted without authority. That's essentially what the statute does.
Now, is that routine that fire districts are putting out fires outside of their district, and they're billing the property owner? Is that what is currently happening when we see a fire outside of a district and we see fire engines from various cities and districts putting that out? Do they get reimbursed for that?
I have no idea. I think part of it is what Ms. Cook said. What this statute, remember, this is a statute.
Okay.
It's put in place. Okay, you could choose not to do anything, but what it does is, the idea is so that no one is sitting around wringing their hands, wondering what's going on, whether or not they have authority to act, whether they're going to be sued by the landowner because they're there without authority. Meanwhile, Rome burns while everyone wrings their hands. The statute was put in to say a board can delegate that authority to the fire district, so the fire district knows we're not violating anyone's rights, we're not acting without authority, and then put in place so that you don't, the board, which is the governing body which has authorized the fire district to act, is not put in the position of being the collection agency. That's up to the individual fire district. So that's again, this is a state scheme. This is a statutory scheme that I assume was drafted to fill a gap.
Yeah. I obviously favor us taking that action. I'll just sort of restate my policy concern that as we are doing something that is worthwhile, that's following up on a state statute, that is using the authority that this statute gives us, that helps us plan for emergencies in an orderly fashion. While we're doing all that, and I hope we do that, and I encourage us to keep working on it, I also am raising the issue of people that are in districts, people that are in cities, that are paying for this stuff, that are paying Ms. Cook's salary, that are paying your salary, that are paying our salaries. We want to make sure that those districts and cities and jurisdictions are not subsidizing what in fact is a very big problem, and that is greater and greater threats outside of metropolitan areas, outside of districts even, let alone metropolitan areas, for the risk of conflagrations, major fires, major accidents, major incidents that need care, and we're not collecting the appropriate revenue from the people or property owners in those areas, in my opinion. And we got to be careful about how we promise the resources of districts, cities, and others in dealing with problems that are outside of those districts and cities.
And also, I think it's really important to understand it's always the fire chief's decision. So even though it's happening in an unprotected area adjacent to a fire district, it's still the fire district's call whether or not they will even entertain the idea of going to that unprotected area, even if the county grants them the right to do that. I think it's also noteworthy that there is a very small number of homes in Lane County that fall in that category of unprotected. We ran a map, and I had it available at the last work session meeting. Oh, no, actually it's a different map. It was a very specific map that literally identified all of the homes that are in unprotected areas. And there is a cluster of homes in South Lane County, and there's a few scattered throughout. But I would say it's probably less than 100 homes in all of Lane County that this would even apply to. So I completely appreciate your concern for the public perception of how this might be perceived as though a district is subsidizing unprotected properties. I think the remedy for that is for the fire district to be able to bill back the homeowner.
And I was just going to say that this does not mandate that the fire districts go out and do this. And presumably, to address your concern directly, Commissioner Sorensen, I can't imagine that a fire district that went out, and I think that's what Ms. Cook just said, it's kind of inconceivable to me when I look at the size of these fire districts that if they went out and extinguished a fire outside their thing, that they would not bill the homeowner for the cost.
And it's been known that they have refused to go fight a fire that was not in their district, and it was a public relations nightmare, but at the same time they realized by the time they got apparatus up there because of the remoteness of the location, they would have put a lot of their
the fire officers at risk and probably couldn't have saved the home anyway. So it's, folks that live in unprotected areas do absorb a certain amount of risk in doing so.
Commissioner Leighton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when I was mayor, and this is pre-Eugene Springfield merger, so Springfield actually had several intergovernmental agreements with either districts, even water districts. So you would see a Springfield Fire and Life Safety truck going up the McKenzie because they had agreements with either, it might have been, say, for instance, the Will Kinsey Fire District. That is a district where they have a board, or I think they still exist. I'm not sure they do now, but at the time they did. So they had a separate board. They had a mechanism in place to tax, but they had no equipment. So they contracted out with, say, Springfield Fire and Life Safety, which I think Eugene does the same. And so it'd be interesting just to maybe follow back around with Chief Groves and some of our other chiefs of our other districts to find out what kind of, the intergovernmental agreements are in place. Because I think what that does, and I think, and Linda, I think you made a great comment there, is that the homes that are not protected, it's so small, it's very few. And I would guess that if it would be very challenging for a chief to say, we're not going to go fight that. I mean, that's part of the work they do. I mean, I remember having these conversations with Chief Murphy in the past. He said, that's just part of who we are, and we're going to go and take care of it. But there would be probably a billing mechanism in place. So my thought is maybe just to kind of put peace in the minds of the commissioners. It'd be interesting just to kind of follow up Chief Groves and just find out, hey, how many intergovernmental agreements do you have outside of the urban area so that you are in place to go take care of those issues? And because I think that's very helpful. And it'd be interesting, like, for instance, I know Commissioner Stewart has the relationship with Goshen Fire District. I don't know how far they go out. Or if they have separate agreements in place. But I remember just even with water districts, they would have intergovernmental agreements in place. Glenwood, for the longest time, was Lane County. So while it was in between Eugene and Springfield, now it's under the planning jurisdiction of Springfield now, and has been for the last several years. The contract, I believe, was with the Glenwood Water District to supply make sure that fire and life safety was going to be supplied within that unincorporated area. But then it also extends out into the rural area as well. So I think the point I'm making is that we have coverage throughout Lane County, and the coverage is made by the fire and life safety operations that have the resources to do so, but they have intergovernmental agreements in place, so revenue is coming back. So when something like that does happen, so that'd be my suggestion, is just maybe circle around with Chief Groves and also maybe some of the other fire district chiefs, just to find out how far they extend, what kind of intergovernmental agreements that they do have. So anyway, I think Commissioner Sorensen, it is a question that needs to be asked. But I think that what you'll find out is that there is significant coverage throughout Lane County, that you're not going to feel like you are, in a sense, paying the freight where the freight's not coming back.
Right.
Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks. I would just, let you know that the small districts that I represent, they do have agreements with each other to assist in situations. So whether you're at Goshen, Pleasant Hill, Lowell, or Dexter, they all 3 or 4 work together. Or up the McKenzie, we have the same thing with the McKenzie district. We used to have Blue River and Upper McKenzie. Now there's just 2, and they work side by side. An interesting piece, as you pointed out, I think South Lane County is probably one of the largest areas that have unprotected homes. And in talking with the Chief Wooten, who's there now, his board has authorized him the ability to go out and essentially provide service to homes that will pay for the service. So you don't have to be in the district. Hypothetically, you're 5 miles out of the district. You can pay the tax rate, they'll collect the tax rate that you'd be paying if you were in the district. So they have a separate contract with each of those individual homes. Some of the things that are balanced is that Mr. Chief Wooten has to deal with is, take for instance, you probably heard of a fire this last year that burnt a house down, and the only folks that responded were, I believe, the Eastern Lane Fire District. When you get so far away from the fire district, number one, the chief has to monitor whether or not he's jeopardizing the citizens that are in his district by responding to it. That's a decision point he has to make. The second piece is that when you arrive to a fire that's 25 miles out of your fire district, really all you're doing is protecting the resource. You're not going to essentially save a structure or something by then. It's just a matter of trying to contain it and make sure it doesn't spread somewhere else. So very complicated, and I appreciate the questions, but I think that the fire districts are managing well within being able to provide that service.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. You know, some of the most complex interagency cooperation comes in Commissioner Bozovich's district out in Santa Clara, where you have homes side by side that are incorporated or not incorporated. And I know that when you talk to Chief Rose, there's a pretty strong agreement out there that firefighters fight fires, and as Commissioner Stewart said, or maybe it was Commissioner Lycan, a fire chief isn't going to say, no, we're not going to respond. And, one of the provisions in the ordinance is that it's undue danger, jeopardy for life or property, and it's a fire chief's call. Having known some fire chiefs, both rural and in the city, they fight fires. They're out to save lives. That's the first thing that they do, and they will not, turn down giving service. So. I really commend Commissioner Stewart for juggling as many districts as he does juggle, and such a vast amount of land out there. It's I sometimes envy your conversations with those chiefs, but I know it's very complex. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just chime in that I support the council bringing back a draft board order that executes this portion of the Oregon revised statutes and gives the pre-authority for fire districts to respond outside in unprotected areas. I think it's an important tool for them to have available, and I believe that they are best equipped to understand when they should respond and not respond, and understanding the reimbursement portions of that. So moving forward, that's only item 2 out of 8 items, and some of them have multiple subletters, so
So I understand there's consensus for me to prepare the final board order on that item number 1. Is that correct?
yeah, I guess it's item number 2, exhibit 1,
yes,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Exhibit 1, but
It's
item number
exhibit
2.
1.
Yeah.
The next item is I think it's pretty straightforward. This is the actual conflict, I have such a hard time with that word, conflagration declaration. And this is the one where, as Ms. Cook explained, this is when the county would call in the state when it would have exhausted its resources. And so what I did is I tried to craft the first item, which is Exhibit 2, which is the delegation of authority to the incident commander. And then that would incorporate what is ultimately Exhibit 3. And what I would plan on doing, if the board gives direction, is work with Ms. Cook to make sure that we have the current names and the current individuals in there. This is the one where we'd have as many pieces in place ahead of the actual event, so that we could move forward more quickly with the declaration and the request for additional assistance. This is one that I would strongly recommend, as I believe Ms. Cook would concur with me, that needs to be reviewed annually to make sure that we have the right names and the right people in the right positions. But again, it's just one of those things, taking care of as many steps as we can ahead of the actual incident.
Right.
Any questions for staff on this? I'll just express my support for these 2 draft board orders. I think it's a really important thing to have the many steps as possible and be ready to act quickly in case of a big fire. I won't try and say that word either.
Big fire. Can I do that?
Yeah, just call it a big fire.
Okay, big fire.
It's a lot easier, isn't it?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so I support, moving forward with the draft board orders. Any other
And-
questions or comments on this?
I will move forward with
Thank you.
finalizing those for the board. So the next one is item number 4, which is on page 3 of my memorandum. And again, this is in the same spirit and the idea of planning for things ahead of time. You'll recall in our work session, and I tried to capture everything that was said, but the board discussed amongst itself how they would communicate with each other, how they would notify each other of an emergency meeting and those sorts of things. And the idea was that would go more smoothly if consensus was reached ahead of time about a predetermined process, how people would be contacted and how they could participate. So that's what I've done here in this draft, which is Exhibit 4, which is to try and capture the conversation to be in. In essence, it says, if you look under the orders part, it says who can call it, talks about that we'll follow the law in terms of calling emergency meetings, and then it talks about using specific methods or any other method that's reasonably likely to notify folks, allowed folks to participate in different, and by folks, I mean board members, to participate in different methods. You'll recall during the exercise, it turned out that Commissioner Bozovich could not communicate except by text. And the idea was, clearly, the sense I got from the board was, not surprisingly, they wanted as much participation and in whatever form that could be by other board members in making these important decisions. Really, the decision point was, if you look at number 3, the part that I really was looking for guidance or input from was, how long do you wait? In other words, Mr. Mokrahajski determines we need to have an emergency board meeting. He sends out the notification. How about whatever, this afternoon at 4 o'clock? How long do you want him to wait before he says, okay, we're going to have that meeting? Is it when he's received? And you can see the different options. You could do a set period of time. You could do it you could defer to his judgment. You could do whenever, once a quorum has responded that they're available. There's a variety of different options. And again, I just think that this certainty ahead of time, I think, lessens the questioning of what happens later. If everyone can point to this and say, this is what we agreed upon, was that if a board member asked for it or if the county administrator asked for it, notification will go out under all these different forms, and after whatever the triggering event is, a board meeting would be set. So that was what I was trying to accomplish in Exhibit 4. So really, to sort of hone down the decision-making, if you look at number 3, that's really the place I need guidance is what is that? What does the board want as the, quote, triggering event that would trip the wire and set the move in terms of timing?
Commissioner Stewart.
Well, I think most importantly, you have to have a quorum. So I think as soon as 3 people respond, if you can set the number of hours, but if you don't have 3 commissioners, you can't move forward. So I think that's the first priority. And the second would be, I think, unless we have members that are completely disconnected for the day, I don't know why you'd want more than 6 or 8 hours to go between to move forward. In my opinion, it could be less, but it seems like we are pretty well connected today with our phones. I get my voice messages from my office to my phone. I get emails, texts. So unless I'm where there's no service, I'm reachable to any type of request.
And if you'll notice, board members, I took into account that in number 2. So what you're essentially directing staff to do, not essentially, you are directing staff to do on number 2 is that notification will go out under using multiple methods. So in other words, when, let's say Mr. Mokrahajski calls that emergency meeting, you're going to be notified by they're going to call your cell phone. If you have a landline, that's going to happen. They're going to send you a text. They'll send you an email. So the idea is far more likely if we try and notify you using 4 different methods that you're going to get it as opposed to 1, if that makes any sense. So, that was the idea of putting 2.
It seems like, number one, we should observe the provisions of the Oregon Open Meetings Law, number one. Number two, the charter does state some methods by which board meetings can be called. The first is the regular method, which is the chair sets out the agenda and directs that the notice be given. The second is that if the chair is not available, the vice chair does that. The third is if the vice chair is not available, the board's most senior member does that. If those 3 aren't available, you can't have a meeting. If any one of those 3 are available and the other 2 are available, then you can have a meeting. So I think the charter sets out how you're going to get a minimum of 3 people together. Now, the technology of how you notify them is a separate thing, and I think that, all available technology seems a little vague to me as far as but if we say, email to the address, county address, cell phone on file with the board secretary, who I think is still Ms. Jones, but I'm not sure if that's her formal title. But, email, cell phone, phone call, and text. Seems like those are the only ways, I don't know, personal service seems a little not likely to happen in an emergency.
And number 2, Commissioner Sorensen does say that in the manner that required by Oregon law, but neither our charter nor Oregon law talks about some of the issues that we've talked about here, which is, just what you mentioned, which is prearranged agreement as to how the notification kind of things are going to go out. Because again, we follow the law, but I mean, again, going down that list, how do you work down that list? Just do we send an email, or do you want Mr. Mokrajski to use every? And that's the idea. Every means available. I left the one part open because I can't envision all the different ways that a commissioner might be able to participate. I mean, it occurred to me, for example, that maybe in the exercise that we had, perhaps Chair Bosevich would not have been able to participate any other way, but he could have maybe been in contact via radio. In other words, one of the emergency folks could have patched through a radio.
So also something that it occurs to me that you may not be aware of yet is that we have just purchased a new alerting system. And the nice thing is that it's hosted outside of Lane County. So the theory is if something happens in Lane County, we would still be able to use the alerting system because of where it's hosted. So that alerting system has an app where all of you could load this app on your cell phone, and through that app, I can send a text from my desk. Steve Mokrajski, anybody that is trying to convene you can send a text message to you, and you can actually reply via text, and that would be very expedient. And then that same system, would also be calling your home phone, your cell phone, your personal cell phone, sending you an email, any information that you've given us about how to contact you, the system can be pre-programmed with that information. So just want to let you know that that's where we're going with the technology, and I think it would be very viable to be able to convene all of you. I'd like to be able to say we could convene you in less than half an hour to be able to do an emergency declaration so that we can start requesting resources from the state and know that they would be covered as reimbursable in the event of a major declaration by the president.
So what I'm going to suggest then is that I will modify number 2 as suggested by Commissioner Sorensen, to list the specific things like, for example, the cell phone number that's on file, certainly, and I'll add including but not limited to, so that the system that Ms. Cook has been describing can be included within that notification process. And then I'll also modify it as emergency meetings shall be will be as provided by Oregon law and the Lane County Charter. And then it sounds like we can make number 3 until the requirements of the Lane Charter have been met and a quorum of board members is available. And it sounds like that would be the simplest and most straightforward. It's going to get it done as quickly as it can be. Does that make sense to folks?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You know what?
Chair.
Commissioner Layton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when the exercise that was performed, so that was an incident in, was it Elmira? Was that the school?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Talking about the full-scale
Yeah.
exercise, right?
So to me, I mean, there's a couple things that come into play on this. So convening, for a declaration, to me, reads more of a natural disaster type of thing, whether it's a wildfire, this type of thing. But so I guess the question I have is, yeah, I think it's important to have the information, but the last thing I want to do as well is get in the way of our public safety professionals who are trying to do their job. And but on a natural disaster, because Commissioner Farr brought up the wildfire issue, obviously this is we're in real time here of what potential could happen. So to me, that's the one area that I believe that we should be prepared to be, because we need to have a declaration as quickly as possible to start reaching out for state and federal resources if an issue like that came about. We have examples, obviously the Thurston shooting, that was within an urban area, but still it was all hands on deck. You had I brought up the hydrogen truck,
Right.
That was only a year and a half after 9/11. But, Homeland Security's on the phone with the city of Springfield. Again, intergovernmental. You're talking about Eugene, Springfield, and County Sheriff's was involved in that. So, I mean, that's one thing. But I think the natural disaster piece, to me, is the one where having a quorum in place so we can move forward on a declaration, I think is really going to be key. So, not that I'm suggesting that one is more important than the other, but I don't know how you write in a board order or anything else, use good judgment. I'm not, we all probably have interpretations of what good judgment is but so I guess that would be my feedback on this piece as much as anything. But on the technology, I thought Commissioner Bozovich's example where he's actually out there and would be actually hard to get a hold of probably makes sense in a way. So I know we talked about the cell phone, the texting, this type of thing to make sure we get the information out. But those are just some general thoughts, I guess, I have on this piece.
I just want to clarify, you may already know this, but I want to just have an opportunity to clarify that the trigger point for an emergency declaration is we've exhausted our resources.
Yeah.
So it could be, a man-made incident. Maybe there's, an explosion of a hazardous materials facility because of a mishap at the plant, or maybe we've got a random, guy come in or man or woman come in and blow a place up and it catches fire everywhere. It can be human caused or natural, the point being that we need an emergency declaration to cover us if we exhaust all of our resources.
Yeah.
When you have an active shooter incident such as in Thurston, as tragic as that is, that's very short duration, and we had the resources. We were able to actually handle that incident, and I realized that resources came from outside the area, but it didn't rise to that level of needing an emergency declaration because the only way we could help ourselves was by asking for, external resources. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification.
And I appreciate that, and I had that in my mind as I was speaking to it, but I think it's good just to also make sure it's clarified as well. And by the way, I think Chief Murphy mentioned that every student was transported to the hospital in less than an hour.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I want to make two notes here. One, that when we talk about cell phones on record, that we also include secondary contacts in that. When we had the one tsunami warning on the coast, I actually missed it because I had failed to unsilence my phone overnight. But if they had called my wife's phone, I probably would have heard it. So, because, they're in the chargers pretty close together. So there are those things where you get into meetings and my phone's silenced right now, and I forget later on to pull it off of silence, and I may miss a call. So secondary contacts, I think, and I will stress to the board that we need to get those to Diana Jones quickly to make sure they're up to date. I no longer have a landline at my house, so it's all cell phone contact. And I want to make note that the only reason for the board to get together on emergency during an emergency is not necessary to make a declaration of emergency and ask for outside resources. Perfect example was the Yellow Point fire. We didn't need to ask for outside resources. We just needed to grant permission to use our resources. And that may be the case. It may not necessarily be, it may be about a resource allocation question, although we're also going to cover some pre-authorization to the county administrator in a later item. But it's not just always about getting to making a declaration of emergency. There may be other decisions that the board needs to make that only the board has the authority to make. So just want to make people aware of that. Are there any other comments about the notice or the Commissioner Sorensen?
And I'm certainly going to take I'll take all of those. I'll try and be as detailed as possible when I list out and modify number 2 where I say primary, secondary, landline, any numbers that the individual board member wants to be considered should be given to Ms. Jones or whoever, so that we have everything.
Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Another thing that came up in the scenario was where one board member wasn't available to be in on the board meeting, but was in communication by text. And one thing that hasn't been really talked about is the Oregon Open Meetings Law kind of envisions you're either in the meeting or you're not in the meeting. So you're in the meeting if you are able to listen to what's going on in the meeting, and if you're not able to listen and participate in the meeting, then you're not in the meeting. But now, because of technology, we now have something different called sort of in the meeting, and that is where Steve and Jay could be communicating with each other, while the other 3, because it does take 3 to be in a meeting, while the other 3 or 4 are meeting. And I think that's an important component, that it's one thing we do have to find 3 for purposes of the charter and the open meetings law, but we can also include people in the process. They aren't in the meeting, but they are in the process by communicating with Linda or Steve or whoever else is, in the meeting. So I would just like to point that out, that in the scenario we had in the I'll call it the fancy scenario with the official trainer and all that, we had the board chair out of ability to be in the meeting, but we did have communication. So it seems to me that we should try to build that into this thought, is to involve, to the extent possible, those people.
Right. And that's why I put, and I'll take some of those things and add those into number 4, but that was really what number 4 of Exhibit 4 was directed at. I understood that the board members very much wanted the counsel of their fellow board members in whatever form that could take, whether it was by telephone, whether it was by text, whether it was by Skype, whether it was by whatever. So that's why I included that. I wanted to make clear that, and I'll add the part about consistent with the Oregon Public Meetings Law, that I understood the board members to say that they did not want to not consider or exclude the counsel of their colleagues simply because the person could not be there in person, or maybe even couldn't be there 100% by telephone, because certainly, as we learned in that exercise, questions could have been posed to Chair Bozovich that he could have responded to via text.
So any further discussion of this item? Do you think we can deal with item 5 in 5 minutes?
Yes, I think we can. This one is, again, this is the, I think I set out the choices very clearly here in terms of it's really the decision point is number one. This is to give that stopgap authority to Mr. Mokrahajski to act until you can be called together in an emergency session. You'll recall that my concern was that he has a limited amount of authority under the charter in terms of the amount of money that he can spend, and we decided, I think in talking with Ms. Cook, that those kinds of resources could be very quickly expended, even before you could be called together. And this would, I agree it's unlikely, but I think that Mr. Mokrahajski is entitled to that legal protection. The idea is that you would delegate him authority to make those necessary decisions until the board could meet. I believe there was consensus that it was not practical, and I think Ms. Cook concurred with this, to try and keep a running total of the amount of money, and I think it was more a time period. I think we've agreed we can get together here pretty quickly, but I think what I would recommend is that you give him the authority to do that for a period of time, 48 hours, 36 hours, whatever, something, until the board can meet in in whatever capacity that is, whether it's an emergency meeting, a special meeting, or a regular meeting. I mean, we can't overlook the possibility that, something could happen Monday night and it could be decided that we could wait until the regular board meeting on Tuesday. So that's really the only decision point you have there, is between the money and or the time. And I think the time makes a lot more sense. I think Ms. Cook agrees with that.
So any other comments relative to this? I will say I believe we should take the dollar amount out of that, the up to X dollars, and it should be a period of time or until the emergency meeting of the Board of Commissioners. I've been in enough ICS exercises and understand that a lot of the incident command structures for a certain incident can stay in place for years, and it's mostly about getting the accounting straight. When did they close the Northridge ICS? Yeah, I mean, it was like almost 10 years later, I think they finally closed out the incident command structure, because that logistics section that's in charge of collecting all the bills and paying them may not get submitted the bills right away. You may not have any idea how much money you're running up in the moment. So to put a dollar amount on there is a really unfair thing to do on an emergency. But I do believe that there's, there's a reasonable amount of time, that we could look at. I think 24 hours is too short. I think 72 is about where I'm comfortable, because say the incident happens 5 p.m. on a Friday, like the Yellow Point fire, it may be Monday before you find 3 commissioners, particularly in the middle of summer, and we're scattered to the winds. Somebody's camping at Odell Lake out of cell service. Somebody's, somewhere on the coast. It may be Monday morning before you can get 3 commissioners in a meeting. So I think 72 hours would be a reasonable period to put in there. Is there any other comment around that? Is there general agreement with those 2 suggestions for carry forward to the draft board order?
So I think we have
Seeing head nods.
I think I have the direction I need. So I will fine-tune the ones that we've talked about today, and get those back before you as soon as the schedule or the agenda allows. And then I will just encourage you to take a look at the remainder of and at that time I would recommend that what we do is take up the other items that are listed there that are the decision points for you.
Well, what I would ask is maybe that we're going to discontinue this item temporarily, take our 10:30 time certain, that if you all can hang around, we'll finish this item up immediately afterwards. I'm hoping that the next item will not take more than about 15 minutes worth of time. So if you all can, and plus we haven't gotten to Linda's second item yet, so she has to be here anyway. So with that, we'll get back to this item after we take up our time certain, which is County Administration, item 8B, Order 1507-2105, in a matter of approving in conjunction with the City of Springfield a 3-year enterprise zone property tax exemption, an additional 2-year extension for a total of 5 years for International Paper Company's significant investment in the City of Springfield. And looks like we have Sarah Case and John Tamulonis, and I'll turn it over to you all.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Bozovich and Commissioners. As you just mentioned, you're being asked to consider a 3-year enterprise zone exemption along with a 2-year addition to that exemption for International Paper and their plant located in Springfield. John Tamulonis is here with me today. Lane County has been working very closely with John and the City of Springfield, who have taken lead on this project, to have International Paper ask for this enterprise zone exemption. I'm just going to be very brief and then turn it over to John. He is the subject matter expert with this particular matter. As in your packet, you will be able to read International Paper is considering doing a upwards of $100 million expansion at their current facility in Springfield. That is primarily to replace some functionally obsolete equipment that is primary to their operation at that facility. So there's a variety of criteria that the company has met, as you can see in your packets. And I think for further details, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John. He's got a wealth of information related to this project. And I will just say that county staff is recommending approval of this application, along with the approval that was given by the City of Springfield last night.
Thank you. So, quick summary. The City Council last night considered the enterprise zone application from International Paper with some additional criteria that met the requirements of the state. Overall, the council voted 6-0 after some discussion and some questions that they had during the work session and then in the regular session later on that evening. Company representatives were there, and they're here today, this morning. Should you have questions, I think one of them spoke to you this morning on that during the public presentation time. The company's trying to keep the operations in Springfield going. Originally at the mill site that there is right now, there used to be 2 paper mills. One was called the Chief. It was installed in 1950. That was eventually removed because they couldn't upgrade the equipment enough to keep it operational and meeting some changing requirements that the industry needed in their paper production. So that one was removed. We have one left, and that one has 2 pieces that are functionally obsolete. From the discussions we've had with the company. One is the head box that provides the pulp that goes into the machine that actually produces the paper, and the other one is the bed of the steam production plant where they actually burn the biomass and produce steam and use it in the operations. So those 2 pieces are very old, 40 and 50 years old, and they do need to be upgraded at this time. The operations right now have 260 employees plus a good number of contractors and contract employees on the site. The value is upward nearly $200 million on our tax rolls and means a substantial amount on our general fund as a city and as general fund government throughout the county. So in presenting this, normally in an enterprise zone you have to increase employment by 10%. The state does allow several exceptions based on the number of criteria and meeting any further reasonable requirements that the local agencies might be requesting of the firm. So among those are, it has to be above $25 million. This is a $101.6 million investment. When it goes in, it would be something that would come on the tax rolls if it has a 5-year exemption at about $85 million at that time with depreciation. That time includes not only the 5-year tax exemption that's under through the enterprise zone, but also 1 year of construction in progress. So if they expect to start the work on this and the orders for the equipment in September of this year, takes some long lead time. They'll have a downtime sometime in 2016. They'll extend that downtime, which is an annual thing that they do right now to clean the paper mill. They'll take out the old equipment, reinstall new equipment as needed, and then be operational as they project now in November of next year. And then it would normally come on the tax rolls in January of the following year, that construction in progress. With the 5-year exemption, it'd be 5 years after that it would come onto the tax rolls. They're expecting no decrease in employment during the construction time, and add 350 to 400 contractors to come in and work on that project during that 1 year until the end of next year, and then continue with the same level of employment thereafter. They've told us it's a very lean operation right now, and they don't expect to have any decrease. But as you can see in this report to you, is that they're agreeing to no decrease of more than 80% of the existing employment. That's more of a company policy than anything else. There may be variations in the market sometime in the future, and there might be decreases, but there is no expectation to reduce those numbers at this time, at any time in the future at the plant, based on this change in the equipment that's out there. It will be somewhat more efficient, but it doesn't meet the criteria that the state requires to allow that, instead of a 10% employment increase. However, it also has to meet the compensation requirements of 150% of Lane County average wage. That was established, it's basically, I think, 2013 average wage, and then that's the one that the state recognizes right now as the level. That amounts to, at 150% of that, $58,530. And that's all the new hires have to be at that level or above when they do hire them during the exemption period, the next 5 years. Right now, the plant employees are enjoying a wage level, a compensation level that's about 2.5 times the Lane County average, or somewhere above $95,000. On average for all the employees at the plant right now. So well-paid employees, most of them have been there for many, many years. Thirdly, they have to sign a first source agreement with the Oregon Employment Division, saying that throughout the exemption period, starting at the beginning right now, they have to notify the Oregon Employment Division of any openings that they have for employment at the plant. Oregon Employment Division will look at the 12 publicly funded employee sources that they have and see if there are individuals that might satisfy criteria for being with the firm, and they would forward those to the firm to consider for employment at the plant throughout the period. I did mention mandatory minimum employment. The plant right now has 260 employees, and during discussions yesterday with Lane County Assessment and Taxation staff, we sort of uncovered that they have one other operation that's inside the Springfield zone, even though it has a Eugene address. It's in Glenwood, and they've got roughly 19 or 20 employees there, and they couldn't tell us how many of those are actually full-time. So we're going to modify the actual application to include those, because state law requires that all the employees within the enterprise zone by a firm be included in that number. So we're going to look at that number and make that adjustment, include it in the application, revised application. And then if there's a signed agreement thereafter, that'll be included in there, and we'll calculate the 80% based on that new number, as opposed to the one that we had in the resolution that you see before you that the county staff prepared. So if this is approved, we have a slight modification to pull those numbers out of the resolution. They'll be in the agreement, they'll be in the enterprise zone application revised, as I've just talked about, and so they'll be adhered to throughout the exemption period. Lastly, they're going to be removing some pieces of equipment, the old head box and the old steam bed floor, where they actually do the burning of the biomass, and those are valued somewhere in the 3 to 4% range. They don't have individual numbers on those, but we've estimated that the overall removal of those pieces of equipment would be a reduction of about $325,000 to all the taxing agencies. So the general government agencies, the city of Springfield, Lane County, and Willamette Lane, that's about $205,000 total. And to Lane County, it's about $34,000 in reduction in property taxes during that construction period and the 5-year exemption. So we've asked the company to pay us $500,000, which is in excess of that number. And that amounts to about $83,000, which offsets the $34,000 that Lane County might lose during that period of time. And that amounts to about $16,000 annually over that period. So, and that has no strings attached to it as to how you might spend that. And so we were looking at proportionally distributing it to the 3 general purpose government agencies, the city, the county, and Willamette Lane Parks District. So if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them and respond to those. Thank you.
Questions, Commissioner Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tamilonis, for the presentation. You answered a lot of the questions just in your presentation that I had kind of thumbed down through here. But I would start off with, if they were just seeking a 3-year tax deferment, they wouldn't even have to come to the body. Is that correct?
Without the increase in employment, they still would have to come back to the 2 sponsors to get a 3-year tax exemption.
Okay.
In this case.
And, it's my understanding on this this tool that they're taking advantage of. It's, I think for most people, they hear the numbers and they assume that there's a loss. So I appreciate the fact that all the taxing districts are actually going to see a little bit of a boost during that 5-year period, more than what they're receiving today. So there's no loss in property tax revenues. The best that I can tell, there's no increase in services. There's not a huge influx of more employees. We're keeping the employees we have. We see sorry, I think I'm going to have to apply for a job there. $95,000. Those are excellent jobs. Those are truly single family wage earner jobs in today's society. So I appreciate that. I would say that, and I think if I remember correctly, most of the board, maybe it's just Commissioner Lyken and I, but we toured a facility about 4 years ago, and if you haven't been in it, it's absolutely incredible what they're doing there with the number of employees. I don't know how they could do any more with less employees. It's pretty well automated, but it's an incredible facility. As far as air quality, I served on Lane Regional Air Pollution, LRAPA, for probably 6-7 years of my existence here. This company is a Title V permit holdee. They have some very stringent criteria that they have to meet as far as air quality, emissions, regular monitoring that has to take place. So, my experience on the board of LRAPA is that they hold these folks within compliance with the law, and I appreciate the fact that they go over and above what's required in this. So I had those statements. And I think the last question that I had for you is, I'm not familiar with the Springfield water system. I know that you have a lot of wells that you draw from. Do you have one site where the water goes to be treated and then dispersed throughout the city? How does your system? We had a comment today that water tastes different on one side of the city as the other, or different locations. I'm not aware of any city that has different water sources. They generally bring the water supply in, treat it, and then it's dispersed through their entire system, the same water. So could you inform me of how your system works?
Sure. It's through the Springfield Utility Board. They have water resources that are actually distributed, unlike the city of Eugene, which takes it out of McKenzie River, treats it, and pipes it across Springfield and distributes it pretty much system-wide in Eugene. Eugene is just adding a few groundwater wells. Springfield's relied on groundwater resources for water since its inception. So there are perhaps different tastes from different wells. There's also the treatment of those water resources that are coming from the ground are slightly different in different locations because there's different setups right now around the community. The largest well that we have producing water, produces about 25 to 30% of the water, is the one right near Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines that is on city-owned property that was put in about 25 years ago. The other ones are distributed across northern Springfield near the McKenzie River. They've also got a sand treatment facility for one that will be drawing water from the Willamette River. They have some modest water rights on the Willamette River through the mill race system that was an old source of water for the Booth Kelly lumber mill many years ago, and it's been upgraded. And so there's some water that we take in there and treated through a sand treatment plant there. So there might be some variation throughout the city depending on where you might be having that water.
But the bottom line is that
it's all safe drinking water.
Each of those are treated separately. They have to meet the federal and state water quality standards. They're tested, I assume. Cottage Grove's testing daily, so I'm assuming Springfield's doing the same. So
we absolutely have to do it under state law with the requirements for a large water source like we have. And there's some new treatment methods that are being required by EPA, and so those are being instituted in the Springfield Utility Board's system in the next few years.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Lyke and then Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, John, thank you very much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. And yeah, Commissioner Stewart and I did. In fact, we did a 3-mill tour that on that was about 4 years ago, I guess, is when it was, through OFRI, and when we toured that facility, and I would agree. If anybody hasn't had an opportunity to tour that facility, I think they'd be very surprised. It's a very high-tech operation, and in fact, the thing when you talk about those large paper machines, you walk by them, you can almost eat off the floor. I mean, that's what I would think I was most impressed about. And growing up around the timber industry, you know, when I was just a kid, and of course my grandfather's mill, you know, they still had wigwam burners. They didn't use everything back in the day, and there was a lot of sawdust around. So completely different than it is today. Question I have, and this really is, I think International Paper purchased this facility, was it in 2008? And somewhere around there, because I remember Rich Hansen came down and visited with us and talked about that IP was going to be purchasing that facility, and the first thing that came to our mind is, what does this mean? And what it meant is that Albany was closing. And so on the investment itself, I guess I'm curious, is there folks from IP that are here today? Are they here today? Or I realize if you're able to answer this question, if you're okay about coming forward to the microphone, I don't. Oh, somebody is. Okay. And my question really centered around the $100 million investment. I mean, that is very significant. And so, are you making these kind of investments in other operations around the country, or how is IP in a sense spreading this, or did you? Is the Springfield operation one that you felt like was really a long-term component as part of your operation is concerned?
Well, International Paper is continuously looking for ways to improve efficiencies. The proposed project as the Springfield Mill
will position the Springfield mill in a better position, both internally and externally to the company. We believe that this proposed project is going to be a great win for the Springfield mill as well as for the community in this neighborhood.
And is IP looking at other investments around the country, or because this is this $100 million investment in the city the size of Springfield, even if it's the entire region, the metropolitan area, that's a significant investment. I don't know if IP's put more of a concentration on the West Coast, East Coast. I don't know if that's even information you can even share.
Well, like I mentioned, International Paper is continuously looking for ways to improve, so I can't really comment on specifically which areas we're looking at, but I do know that we are looking at making improvements in this area.
Okay, that's really all I had. That was the question I had. I just think it's impressive that IP is willing to make this kind of investment, and it is, like I mentioned before, a very high-tech mill, and I would suggest, it's my understanding that if people do want a tour, they can make a phone call and have a tour. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's a contact process for that, but we welcome any visitors, and we'll any ways that we can continue to be a good neighbor.
I'd highly recommend folks to do that because it is an impressive operation. It's my understanding that my old friend Ken Hill finally retired from that. Oh, Ken, you're right there. Oh my gosh, you are here. You didn't retire. You don't have your hat on. That's gosh dang it. Well, you're hiding. Oh, well, welcome, Ken. I've known Ken for a long time, and back when he was a Weyerhaeuser guy. So, well, glad to see you. So I'm glad you're not retired yet. Good for you. Well, I'm happy to hear that. The other question I had really came down to the in lieu of. Mm-hmm. And can you repeat that one more time, John? Kind of the in lieu of and what what kind of disbursement you're looking at?
So we're looking at $500,000 paid, $100,000 a year. On July 1st of the 5 years, each of the 5 years of the tax exemption. And we're distributed in proportion to the general government tax rate, including bonds. And so that produces about 16% of that for Lane County. So over $100,000, that's about $16,000 per year for 5 years.
For 5 years.
And you may spend it as you please. And we do 20% for Willamette Lane and about 63% for the city of Springfield based on the tax rates that we have in proportion of those.
So I would hope, and this is maybe a separate piece for the board to look at, but I would hope that our portion in lieu of that we would really try to focus on the workforce end of it. I think that would make a lot of sense from Lane County's perspective. And really that's the questions I had. And also, I just want to make one more mention, and that is, I think it was in 2000, I think I was still a city councilor before I was mayor, but we adopted, at the time, probably one of the most comprehensive groundwater protection programs, not just here in the state of Oregon, but actually throughout the country. And so I think Springfield, of course, Springfield Utility Board oversees that. And I think that we can call ourselves very fortunate that because of that protection in place, that we have some of the best drinking water you'll find locally. And there may be different tastes. I don't know. I know there's the wellhead that's near the plant. It's on the other side of the expressway. It's right near the McKenzie River. I know that that's there, and I know that it's highly protected. But that was actually one of those very proud moments I had first coming on the city council. I know John and myself and the late Lyle Hatfield actually did a tour of businesses who were scared that we were going to be putting them out of business. And I think between 2000 and 2010, Springfield did pretty well economically. Yes, very well, actually. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Commissioner Sorensen and then Commissioner Farr.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tamilanis, thank you very much for your presentation. It did answer, as Commissioner Stewart mentioned, a number of questions. Regarding the payment of $500,000 to the city, the numbers you gave in terms of what's going to Willamette Lane or Lane County, how is that memorialized? Because right here it says they have to pay you $500,000. It doesn't say you have to pay us a portion of that.
I was hoping to have a little black bag. And we'll
Yeah,
put
well,
money
that's the
there and
method
just
that
run it over
I
to-
understand is used here, so.
What we're going to do is the resolution that you have before you has provisions in it to memorialize the agreement through a three-party agreement, which is the city, the county, and the two sponsors, and the firm. And that will have the details on payment, who to pay it to, what the timing is,
Okay.
all those details, including numbers on employment, the 80%. First source agreement will be attached to that as an addendum. And so we'll have, you would be giving, if you approved it, permission for the county administrator to sign that once it's complete and satisfactory, both to the county, the city, the attorneys of all of us, and the firm and their attorneys, so that we have an agreement that will be complete.
Okay.
And we expect that might be done in 2 or 3 weeks. It's not a very complicated agreement, just has to be thorough and detail those things.
And regarding the the recitation in the board order that the Lane County prevailing average annual wage of $38,353, is that the individual average annual wage for Lane County workers?
Yes, at a particular time when the state actually had information. And Sarah's confirming, because I seem to remember it's usually about 2 years ago when they use the numbers, because the 2014 aren't available just yet, because they haven't separated them out from manufacturing. And so those are the ones that the state establishes, and then 150% is the number that they establish.
And that's the 57,530.
Or 58,530, or whatever the number is, yeah.
58 or 57? It's 57 in here. In the warehouse.
We will
whereas
confirm that and
clause.
put it in there. I can't remember if it's 57 or 58.
I can't either.
In one place, it's 57, and in one
Another
place,
place
it's
is
58.
Yeah, I apologize for that, but
Well,
Well, no, I'm just trying to understand, is the first number, the 38,000, is like a 1 year ago number?
that's a 2013 number that the
2
state
years.
established as the current number to base any requirements
Okay.
on.
And then the 57,530 is the 2 years ago number that we now use to determine the 150%.
That's 150% of the 38,000.
Okay, all right. And then the number that International Paper is, the number they're required to hit is 57,530. But they're hitting a much higher number. What is that higher number?
Well, they're hitting, from the company's discussions with us, is that they said their average is, I'd say, at least 2.5 times what the Lane County average, which is about $95,000.
95,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Less than what Chip Kelly made, but more than what Lane County Commissioners make.
I don't know how much you make, but given Commissioner
Chip
Stewart's
Kelly makes
statements
more than
earlier,
we do, just to
if
keep
he
that
had a
in
degree in
perspective.
engineering, I think he'd be over there pretty quickly.
Okay, so I know the Association of Western Pulp and Paper Workers represent some of the workers at the plant. How many of the workers that are going to be hired, additional workers, will be in that union?
I have no idea, because I don't know what openings there may be.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone from
We
the
didn't
company
get
would know
this
that.
nice person's name either, so we could
yeah.
call her Miss Paper, but I think it would be better to call her Ms.
We have a total of 260 employees at International Paper.
If you wouldn't mind stepping up to the mic, because that's our record. And also, if you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record also.
My name is Callie Hodgson. I'm the mill manager at the Springfield International Paper Mill. We have 260 employees, 182 union employees.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other question I had is, when, and this is from Mr. Tamulonis, the $500,000 is to be paid in $100,000 installments, July 1 of each year. When do you think the first July 1 will occur?
That would be in 2017.
2017, and for 5 years thereafter.
Right.
Now, on the existing investment, and
Roughly $190 million in AV.
190 million currently, and they're adding 101.6.
Right.
Okay. On the existing plant, are they receiving any reduction in their property taxes?
Not that I'm aware of.
So that's not part of this agreement. It's all about the additional 101.6 million investment.
Right. So as I understand it, it's a large mill. It's complicated. The land's got value. The equipment has value. The buildings have value. The land doesn't depreciate. That probably appreciates, but then the other things may depreciate over time. They were on separate schedules that are very complicated. This whole, the actual assessments that are imposed on the company are done by the Department of Revenue in Salem, working with Peter Rieksecker, who's in your Lane County A&T department, and so he's working with the enterprise zone, and so he's working back and forth with those to understand how those actually change. So we can say the existing investment's got some depreciation or appreciation. I can't tell you what that is year to year, except for looking to the past. I can't predict the future. And then on the new equipment, it probably has a depreciating value, which we estimate to be about $85 million when it actually comes back onto the tax rolls and would be subject to the tax rates that are distributed.
So if I were to just use two big numbers here to help me and maybe the public understand this, we have two big piles of equipment here. We have one big pile of equipment and land and equipment that's worth roughly $200 million. And it's the existing equipment. And it will continue to pay taxes to the city, to the school district, to all the taxing districts, the county, and it will continue to pay taxes under Oregon law, unaffected by any action we're taking today, pro or con.
Absolutely.
And the other pile is a as yet unbuilt pile of equipment, which I will call the $100 million pile. And that will begin to be constructed next year. The planning under the document starts in September of this year, and the construction starts next year. And after it's constructed, and after $100 million or more has been invested, then for a period of 5 years, they will pay the city $500,000, $100,000 a year.
That's right.
And then over the remaining life of that value, currently estimated to be $85 million in depreciation. So it'll go from $101 million to $85 million in 5 years. But for the remainder of its life at $85 million and declining, it'll pay property taxes.
Absolutely.
Can you give me the year 6 property tax number to illustrate what $85 million in taxes to the city of Springfield, Willamette Lane, Lane County would be?
So on year 6, if it's valued at $85 million, that would mean $616,000 to the city of Springfield. That would mean $197,000 and some change to Willamette Lane, and $161,000 and some change to the Lane County per year after that. If it's valued at $85 million.
Right. So what is the useful life of the $101.6 million in investment?
Well, using the example that we have on the ground right now, the head box is 50 years old. The base of the steam plant that does where the things are burned to produce steam, that's 40 years old. So it has a long lifetime. So the equipment they're removing, and that would be the only adjustment to your discussion point that you just had, is valued at about $3 to $4 million. So that's what would be taken off the tax rolls. Everything else would be on the tax rolls.
Okay.
So it's got a long lifetime, as long as the rest of the equipment is kept upgraded.
Right. Will the workers need any training prior to becoming workers? Is there any, like in the past, we've had agreements with the employment division or the workforce partnership or Lane Community College on the training of workers for specific expansions. I'm not hearing anything about that. Is that going to happen, or is that on the job, or how would you characterize it?
The existing workforce, from what I understand and talking with some of the company, has been around for a long time for the most part. Some might be close to my age in retirement, and so they might...
I'm glad you didn't say your age.
My age is even beyond retirement, actually, so that's the other part. But they would probably need some training coming into the company unless they were doing an operation very similar somewhere else. I assume that the company would assume that or hire to avoid that, but that's pretty much up to the company.
I used the example of two piles here, a 200 million pile and a 100 million pile. How many workers does it take to do the current, and how many workers will it take to do the new?
At the existing plant, 200, according to the company's discussions we've had, and I've got a confirming email, 260.
So there won't be any new workers added?
That's right.
They'll retain the workforce, but they won't add workers.
And as a couple people have mentioned earlier, it's a lean workforce. It's pretty much what it takes to operate the facility right now.
Uh-huh.
And they expect to maintain that throughout the exemption period, but they can't agree to that number as a floor as a company, just from company policy. Okay. So that's why the 80% is in the agreement.
And remind me what the term 80% means. 80% of what?
80% will be total employment. That's the 260 that are in the current mill, and then we'll make that minor adjustment based on some numbers that will come from the firm on the operations that are actually in Glenwood. So it'll be 80% of 260 plus roughly 20, so about 280. It'll be 80% of that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Farrar.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich, and thanks, Commissioner Sorensen, for a very detailed series of questions. It really answered a lot of the questions that I was going to ask. You know, when I was in the legislature, I sat on the House Revenue and received lessons every single day on how taxes work. And just to mention the little black bag that you were talking about, that went out years ago. I don't have that anymore. And but Commissioner Sorensen really got to the heart of much of the questions that I was going to ask. You know, the fact that the existing plant will continue to pay taxes at approximately its current rate throughout the not just the construction phase, but throughout the life of the tax exemptions that are being requested. That money, the property tax money, pays for schools, pays for city general government, pays for county general government, pays for special districts and fire districts general government, whichever may be within the area that is being affected, and that'll continue. So the question that I had, the concern that I have is for ongoing employment, not just adding new jobs, but ongoing employment. You know, I used to travel the Oregon coast fairly frequently. I'd drive through Reedsport and Gardner, and large mill in Gardner closed down and severely affected the entire area after that large mill in Gardner closed down. And what we're looking at with the mill in Springfield is that by investing this amount of money, it's an assurance that this mill is not going to close down, that it will continue to pay property taxes at the higher rate that it currently pays, and an even higher rate or higher amount in starting 5 years from now. But in addition to that, in addition to the taxes that they're currently paying, they're also going to be paying a $500,000 in lieu of taxes payment. So that is actually the additional income, so to speak, the revenue stream that the city of Springfield will be receiving and distributing throughout the other jurisdictions. So really, IP will be paying more in taxes and lieu of taxes than they currently are paying throughout the life, and then
Ever so slightly, yes.
ever so slightly. But and then with the questions that Commissioner Sorensen, the two piles that he was talking about, that kicks in after 5 years. I think that was very clearly asked and very clearly stated in response. So in effect, with this investment in Springfield, we're not going to see a dismantling of a mill the way we did in Gardner and the way we did in Albany.
And the way we did in Springfield, because the other mill, paper mill, could not be upgraded sufficiently to operate sufficiently.
And let's take that even more, the way we did in Tillamook County, not with the IP mills, but with other mills, and the way we did in Douglas County, and let's name the counties that lost mills. We're not going to see that kind of dismantling. We're going to see an investment in the jobs and the future of Springfield. To me, it's a sign, the fact that they're investing in our local economy is a really good gesture, a perfect gesture that they intend to stay here, intend to keep the 280 or so minus 20% jobs for the long haul that are paying someplace around 6-digit on average. Needless to say, there are going to be some numbers that skew that average higher, but many of the workers are working for a collective bargaining, through a collective bargaining unit, so guaranteed wages. So. Once again, I'm going to thank Commissioner Sorensen for asking the questions in a much more eloquent fashion than I could have ever asked him. And thank you for the answers, well-prepared answers.
Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So real quickly, I think what's important to note as well is that these are really, I would call them skilled positions. And because one of the things that caught my eye immediately is when after the tours, when a lot of introductions were made with employees and how many were engineers. Not enough from Oregon State University, by the way. They were from Wisconsin and Ohio State and everywhere else, but a lot of Big Ten engineers, darn it. So anyway, but I think that's important to note. And the example I'll use is when my grandfather's mill back in the 50s and 60s was really operating at a high level. It was a 2x4 stud mill, probably producing somewhere between 30 and 50 million board feet. It took him almost 400 employees. Today, that same mill would probably use maybe 25, 50 employees tops because of the technology. And that's why I say to folks, if you get a chance to tour this IP facility, you would be very impressed. Because it's amazing on the automation and technology that's used there. It's a well-oiled machine, and so that's why. And I think Commissioner Sorensen asking that question, and the way he phrased it as far as the investment, this is a significant investment to the community. And I do know prior when Weyerhaeuser was a terrific community partner. It's my understanding as well, IP is also a very good community partner too, and I really commend that. That's what's important as well is the giving back to the community, not only volunteer but financially, and I think that's something we really appreciate and want to say thank you to IP as well for carrying on that Weyerhaeuser tradition that was very, very strong, and so appreciate that as well. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say that, a little bit of quick math and all that, they're looking at an annual payroll of about $25 million out of that facility. $25 million that's going into the local economy here in Lane County. It's really important to keep that payroll here in Lane County. Just think about what the state income tax, which goes to schools and everything else off of $25 million, let alone the LTD taxes paid on that $25 million and all the other taxation. It's not just property taxes, that people want to focus on. And then a little other quick math, if they're $3.5 million in plant right now, and in 5 years we take on $85 million, that's 20 times the value, assessed value, and 20 times more taxes after 5 years. And in that 5-year period, they're going to pay us an extra $100,000 just because. So we get an immediate gain of $100,000 in taxes, and then after 5 years, we get 20 times the amount of tax that we are collecting on the current plant now. It's such a win-win for the county and the city. I can't see how we can't support this. Not to mention, I'm sure that as they put in $100 million worth of plant, it's going to have efficiencies built into it. whether it generates more electricity from the cogen or whether it uses less electricity in the processing and less chemicals and less materials, it's going to be a net gain environmentally. I'm pretty sure you don't make that kind of investment if it's not going to improve your bottom line in saving costs. So encouraging them to make this investment is actually encouraging something that's good for our environment and the health of our community. Not to mention, one of the largest indicators of health outcomes is poverty, even more so than tobacco and obesity. 95,000 a year is hardly poverty level jobs. So I think supporting this enterprise zone waiver is a good thing all around for our community, for the health of the community, for our economy. It's just generally a good thing. I almost chimed in when Commissioner Stewart asked about the water system out there. I know a little something about water systems and subs in general, and particularly the IP property, because it is upstream of the eWeb intake where I was an engineer. The only issue there was an old site there where there's some penta groundwater pollution, probably one of the most monitored sites in Lane County, surrounded by monitoring wells. We know exactly which direction the groundwater is moving. The only well that's even threatened is a Rainbow well. That's that one that sits at the intersection of 42nd and 126, right there. And it's hardly ever used. It's a system they don't turn on. It's one of their lowest priority wells. It's got a carbon filter system already set up next to it that Weyerhaeuser paid to install. It doesn't have the carbon in it, the activated carbon. If the penta ever reaches there, it hasn't even gotten close. And in fact, over time, the penta is actually degrading with the soil interactions like a lot of chemicals do. So the issue of groundwater in that area is highly monitored. The wells on the other side are upstream in the groundwater plume of the facility, the ones that Sub has on the riverbank there. And the system in Springfield is a demand source system, distributed source system, where they've got everything from the Willamette slow filtration system to the Rainbow wells up there in the old Chase well field, where they all come together. And it depends on what day of the year, what well water you're drinking or source water you're drinking, because it all depends on the demand in the system, what ones they turn on. They try and turn on their highest producers for the least amount of money first, which is relatively means the least amount of treatment needed, the greatest pumping efficiencies and all that stuff. So you drink those wells first and they turn on other ones as demand comes on. So to say that the water tastes different in one section of town versus another, there may be some validity because you're closer to a certain well that might have a little bit of different mineral content to it, and taste is subjective. I know one of the things when I was at eWeb, there's a little bit of a battle going between eWeb and Sub of who won the best tasting water in the state contest every year. It was always either eWeb or Sub. It was kind of like bragging rights for the next year. We've got really excellent tasting water here. And one of the reasons is we've got great raw water quality to start with. And then we have to take that great raw water and make it meet all the drinking water standards, which everything does. So I don't believe there's an issue with this particular facility, and anything they do in the future is only going to increase the protections of groundwater because of the existing groundwater protection plan that is in place now that wasn't in place when that penta pollution occurred years and years and years ago. So this is overall, I think, just a win-win for Lane County, and I'll be supporting the motion. Commissioner Lykin.
Mr. Chair, with that, I'd like to move approval of Order 15-07-21-05 in the matter of approving, in conjunction with the City of Springfield, a 3-year enterprise zone property tax exemption and an additional 2-year extension for a total of 5 years for International Paper Company's significant investment in the City of Springfield.
I'll second it, but I would just like to clarify that it includes the small amendment.
Yes, please do read the amendment.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So it's been moved and seconded to include the amendment. Is there any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to say that I appreciate the thoroughness in responding to my questions, and I think that the city and county have done a good job in negotiating and discussing with international paper on the amount of payment that'll be made to the city and to the county and to Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District, or through the city to those entities. And I also appreciate the information about the present valued property investment of $190 million, and that it is not a portion of this measure or board decision. And thanks very much.
Further discussion of the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you very much. So with that, we will jump back to item 7B. We were almost getting through that. If Ms. Cook is available, here she comes, and I imagine Mr. Dingle probably is making his way down. Jane. Yes. So we were up to item 6, I believe. I'm trying to scroll down here. Yes. And do we know if Mr. Dingle is going to be able to make it back down? He is? Okay. Which was the annual review of these board orders. Is there any specific questions about having an annual review of these board orders and making sure that we put the correct names in some of the pre-authorizations year to year?
I think it's pretty clear. The intent was that they renewed annually, just like we do start out the year with other elections that we are required to do. So I think it's a good procedure that needs to be added.
I was moderating you upstairs, so I came as quickly as I could.
Obviously run faster than he does.
Well, that's great. So I'm trying to remember where we left off.
We were just discussing the annual review.
Number 6.
Number 6. So I think it's pretty straightforward as to why we need this. Is there any questions on this from the board? Seeing none, I think you can write that into the process. So number 7 was the other emergency preparedness procedures.
Can I back? So does the board want to leave them in effect, or does it want that? You're saying you don't want that alternative language that I put there in italics.
What page are you on?
I'm sorry, on page 5.
Yeah.
So the choice is to have
they'd expire on January 31st.
Right, and if we do that, then we have to make sure positive that we do the review, because then we'd have to restart it That's the policy choice for the board. I was recommending that we make them continue, so if something happened, they would remain in effect, but that we would calendar and review them. So
yeah, I support the idea of having the calendaring in versus an automatic expiration, because if for some unforeseen reason we forget, which we've done with other items, like appointing somebody to a urban renewal agency that was an annual event that we forgot about over time, and they slip off the thing. I would rather not have suddenly not have our delegation of authority because an administrator in the future lost track of an annual item.
And actually what I planned on doing in between now and our next meeting on this was to actually go to Ms. Jones and actually try and calendar that, like set that aside and set a tickler out a couple of months before that.
Yep. So going on to item 7. the other emergency preparedness procedures?
These were some things that that Ms. Cook discussed and some other issues that came up, and so I basically went through and tried to break out those kinds of things that Mr. Mokrahajski could do as part of just simply amending the Administrative Procedures Manual, and those things that required board action. So you'll see under item 7, small b, that he has the authority to develop, like an emergency building evacuation procedure and notification and that sort of thing, an active shooter procedure that wouldn't require board approval. And the rest of these are things that we've talked about.
Any questions about that item? And moving on to number 8.
And number 8 is, there was a couple of different options here. The main one I want to point out is one that Ms. Cook has mentioned a couple of different times, which is this board order that I'm talking about the board doing is not the one that would be necessarily make this eligible for FEMA things. That's a different specific one. This is really just to set up what would trigger these other procedures that you put in place involving the county administrator. And so you'll recall that Mr. Mokrahajski mentioned that in the jurisdiction where he previously worked, that they had a series of different declarations depending on the type of emergency. I've talked to Mr. Mokrahajski, and my recommendation to the board is that we adopt a sort of generic one that, in other words, when there's an emergency, and you could list including but not limited to, because we're trying to decide all the different things. There's fire, there's flood, there's earthquake, there's tsunami, there's different whatever. That would potentially trigger those other things that we've talked about here, which is the emergency meeting order and the authority for him to use, exercise those powers. And so I think it's better to make it generic. And I think I've included, did I include one in the materials from Douglas County? I thought I did.
Yes, you did.
Okay. So my recommendation is that the board, rather than try and come up with a different board order for every theoretical type of man-made or natural disaster, that you simply declare, one, and then we could list including but not limited to, and I'd go through my catalog of disaster movies and see if I could find them all. And that would be the triggering event for Mr. Mokrahajski's authority to spend resources and do those sorts of things. And again, that's just another piece of, I think that's good that it's talked about ahead of time, and I think it provides Mr. Mokrahajski the legal authority and the protection he needs in the event that he has to make those decisions.
I suddenly have this vision of Mr. Dingell watching Towering Inferno with O.J. Simpson,
The one I was thinking about.
I was thinking about zombie sharks.
I was thinking Towering Inferno, actually.
Any questions about this item? Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to point out that I had a complex products liability case several years ago, and the guy that made the model of the thing was in Drain, Oregon, and he took me out to his property. I know this is not exactly Lane County, but it's close.
Very close.
And he showed me the model that he built for the Towering Inferno. That's the rest of the story.
I can tell you one of the best double features ever is the Towering Inferno and the Poseidon Adventure back to back.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty hard to beat.
And we digress.
Yeah.
So
relevant to me.
So staying somewhat relevant to TV and all that stuff, we couldn't declare an emergency for unemployment like they did in House of Cards, could we?
No.
Sorry, I really digress.
That's cool. So I think I have the direction that I need, and what I'll do is I will, and I mentioned Ms. Cook, coincidentally, this Thursday there will be a presentation at the Oregon County Councils Association on emergency operation procedures and the relationship with the board to that. So I will, if there's anything new that crops up in there, I'll incorporate it. But what I'll do is come up with, take the direction that the board has given, come up with these finalized orders and get those back in front of the board as soon as possible. Bring them up to the agenda team and get them on the schedule. I plan on I can work on these. I think I can get my part of these done by next Tuesday.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item? Or before you run away, procedure-wise, we've got an executive session scheduled with you that's pretty lengthy. Are you available over lunchtime if we decide to just run straight into lunch?
Sure.
Or
Absolutely.
All right. Keep an eye on the monitor. We'll let you know.
So, because we're going to meet in the regular...
Yeah.
Okay.
In the BCC conference room. Linda, I think we got your item coming up next, item C, which is just a report and overview on the emergency operations plan. And we'll turn it over to you.
You got us all giddy, and so now Steve and I were laughing. So what I'm providing to you today is an oral briefing. What I'd like to go over is just give you a broad brush stroke of the emergency operations plan that's going to be coming to you. Originally, when we had our work session, I want to say in May, was that? June 2nd, late May, early June. June 2nd, I had mentioned that we wanted to get it done by the end of June. But then, given that work session, knowing that there was going to be a follow-on work session and there was more work to do, I worked it out with the state. So we're looking to promulgate the updated EOP, Emergency Operations Plan, in September. So I wanted to use this time to give you a preview of what's to come, what's in the plan. It's a 568-page document. It will be made available online. But I wanted to just kind of step through a few things and then answer any questions you might have. And like I said, this is intended to just be somewhat discussion-based, and depending on how deep you want to go or how high level you want to keep it, this may only take, 5-10 minutes. Okay, so first of all, naturally, I'm not requesting any action from you today. I do want to note that back in 2007, we updated Lane Manual Chapter 54 to kind of as an abstract to the Emergency Operations Plan, so we're going to need to take a look at that and update this. As a matter of background, the Emergency Operations Plan has been something that was kind of a homegrown document. It did comply with FEMA guidance, a homegrown document that we kept updating every 2 years. This time around, we hired a contractor that has made or has developed plans throughout the state for a number of different counties. And we felt that their model was mature enough and comprehensive enough and helpful enough that I have the world's worst focus. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So let me get my thoughts back. Okay, so the contractor has put together a really great template. They're using it in all the counties throughout the state, including at the state level. So I felt that they had about 10 years to refine this model with all these local jurisdictions. I felt that this would be a good time for Lane County. I like to be a slow adopter on things like that as it works out its bugs. We were one of the first counties that could have taken advantage of the services. We did. It was very new, and we actually rejected the product several years ago, and this time we're accepting the product. So it's really improved as it worked its way through all these other counties. Several of the cities, Eugene and Springfield, the metro area, has used this same model, and Lane County's using it. And then I'm encouraging some of the small cities, such as the city of Bonita, city of Cresswell, Cottage Grove, to also use this same model. And basically, it's just a big document template. But the thing, some people don't like templated documents, but the thing I like about templated documents is that they're tested, and that somebody initially did put the work in to make sure that all of the key elements of a document are included. So what is an emergency operations plan? It's basically a framework for performing emergency functions during a disaster. So it doesn't necessarily lay out, we're going to do this in 1, 2, 3 order. It is a framework in which we will respond, and they're intended for short-term response and short-term recovery. In other words, it's very much in the moment. In terms of mitigating action items, we have a separate mitigating projects trying to lessen the impact that a disaster might have on our community. We have a hazard mitigation plan, and we have a continuity of operations plan. So the emergency operations plan is very focused on immediate response and short-term recovery. We don't have a recovery plan in place in Lane County. The state recently came out with one, and we can consider that in future work plan years. The other purpose of the emergency operation plan is to identify key roles and responsibilities in terms of who is the primary and who is the support agency if we have a major disaster. So when you consider what happens during a major emergency, you need police, fire, public works, public health, hospitals, and utilities. And so the emergency operations plan is only for county government. And of course, within county government, we have law enforcement, public works, and Health and Human Services. So then we need to look to outside agencies to vet our fire and our references to fire, hospitals, and utilities. So what we will do is we'll be putting this plan out for review for all the department directors, and with the help of the county administrator, they'll be encouraged to review that during the month of August. There shouldn't be a whole lot of new material in there because we do this every so often. However, there may have been some staffing changes or retirements, et cetera. So we do want the department directors to review the document. It'll be made available electronically. It can be, it's already, our old plan is out on the Lane County Emergency Management website. The new one can be uploaded to that so that they can download it, search on a few keywords and identify the areas that they really need to be reviewing. And I can also provide them a matrix of the areas that they should review. Let's see, so what else do I want to talk with you about? It outlines steps for coordination with response partners. This is one of the areas I think we have the most opportunity for growth in terms of our organizational maturity for coordinating emergencies. I think that we still have a lot of work to do, especially getting police and fire to work well together on a scene. I think everybody gets along. I think everybody does their best, but I do think that there is kind of a little bumpiness, if you will, when it comes to establishing ICS on the scene. I don't think fire and law enforcement are natural. I don't think it becomes naturally for them to create a law enforcement branch within a fire ICS structure or vice versa. So we do have some work to do on that for some of the routine emergencies that we experience on a yearly basis. Let's see. Who is the plan written for? It's written for the first response agencies within county government. It's written for our response agency partners so that they know what the county intends to do, and it's written for the general public. And so we want to make sure, in terms of the general public, the idea is to build public trust so that they understand that we do have a plan for how to go about responding to emergencies. When does it get activated? Once it's promulgated by the County Board of Commissioners, it can go in effect for any incidents in or affecting the county. We can invoke the plan at any time. We don't have to have an emergency declaration. We can say that, you know, and this will be a decision point. If we invoke the plan, we can ask ourselves, do we want to invoke some of these board orders that we discussed today, or do we want these board orders to only be invoked under an emergency declaration? If we make it so that it's whenever we invoke the emergency operations plan, then we know we're covered. We can invoke the emergency operations plan without activating the EOC or declaring an emergency. The point is, when you say that we are invoking this plan, it sends a message to the community, it sends a message to our response partners that we feel that we have a big deal on our hands and we're trying to cope with it, and we might need their help. We might need your help, of course. Let's see. And I think that's it in a nutshell. Those were the biggest points that I wanted to bring to you, let you know. One, this huge document is going to get out there for review. It's going to come to you for your review. And that's a big deal to try to read all that, and I wouldn't expect you to, but I wanted to give you confidence that it will be passed on to the department directors for their opportunity to review so that you will be getting a complete product, and then it'll come to you in September with a letter of promulgation to be signed. Normally it gets signed, a letter normally gets signed just by the chair. In this case, we'd like it signed by every commissioner representing their district. Any questions?
Questions for Linda? So I just want to say, thank you for continuing to work on this. With all the publicity the New Yorker article brought around what was really kind of a little bit old news, the Oregon Resiliency Plan that came out in 2013. It's like suddenly people noticed it 2 years later. I got email from constituents saying, so what's Lane County doing, about this? And I wrote back and explained, one, we went through this little ICS exercise with the board and realized, and through the request from the fire districts on the unprotected areas, that we needed to do some housework on our own delegations of authority to be more prepared and all that, which we just directed staff to improve on. And at the same time, we were working on an update of our emergency operations plan, which you just gave us an update on. And it's just, the piece about getting the county ready for an emergency and having that plan in place so that when the emergency does come, at least we know what we're supposed to be doing. Of course, you never know in an emergency that you always have to do a little bit of thinking on the fly. But if you're starting to think in advance about what you're going to do as an organization or an individual when that emergency happens, that's what's important. And I think we're doing that as an organization through these two actions the board's taking this morning, of thinking about, and you read the books about people that survive major incidents, whether it's, a plane crash or a train crash or fire or whatever. It's always the people that thought about, what would I do if this ever happened? It's I hate to put it this way, but the paranoid will survive. And I'd like to think that in Lane County, we're having just enough paranoia to start thinking about what we're doing. What I would love for is to encourage our citizens out there to indulge in a little paranoia themselves and start thinking about, what will your family do in an emergency? How prepared are you? Do you have a couple days worth of drinking water and food? Do you have a couple weeks worth? Because have all your neighbors thought and been paranoid enough, and are they going to be knocking on your door when you're the only people with water and they've got an infant son, or a nursing mom that needs to drink water, safe drinking water? And are you going to say no? So you need to almost prepare for yourself and then prepare for the neighbors that don't prepare, so that you can, span that length of time it's going to take to get help from outside. Because a lot of what we're talking about in the declaration of emergency is getting to the point where we are asking as Lane County for that help from outside. And that can take days. Ask the folks in New Orleans that suffered through Katrina. Even ask some of the folks in our most recent ice storm how long it took them to get power back in some of the remote areas. That help may be a long time in coming, and if you read the resiliency plan, they're talking 1 to 3 months in the Willamette Valley for electricity to be restored. That's a long time without power. Mm-hmm. And it also is a long time for your employer to be without power. So people have to think about, how are they going to continue, keeping their household afloat and all that, and think a little bit more and have those paranoid thoughts. And I want to appreciate that we have our own person that's dedicated to being paranoid for us on staff. And I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to seeing the plan when it comes out. And I'll probably be one of those paranoid people that will read it. So.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah. Mr. Mokahysky.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I appreciate your comments and what Linda has shared, and I just wanted to mention to the board that I had an opportunity to meet yesterday with the city managers of Eugene and Springfield, and this conversation came up as there's been, as you mentioned, a lot of discussion in the community over the last few days because of that article in the New York Times and in the Register-Guard. And there's a lot of concern out there, despite the fact this issue related to the earthquake has been out there for quite some time. One of the things that we talked about, at least with the Metro partners, was beginning a discussion and potentially having a joint elected officials meeting that has not occurred for quite some time. And it occurred to us that anytime you get public attention, and actually I think the New York Times article and the Register-Guard article and other publications about this are really a good thing, in the sense they generate awareness among the community. It generates a discussion. And so we may have an opportunity to capture that awareness that's been presented to our residents, and have our elected bodies come together and further that conversation, potentially bring the law enforcement and fire side of the house to bear there. So I just wanted to throw that out to the board, and you don't have to give a response today, but maybe think about that as we bring forward the update to the emergency operations plan. Both of the cities in the metro area have their own emergency operation plan. They're really the same plan, as I understand it, that they've co-adopted. The potential that maybe later on this year we come together and continue that conversation about how do we coordinate between the public agencies, at least in the metro area. And we could even consider, I think, as we did several months ago, go out to all of the cities throughout Lane County and have discussion about funding measures and other, the tobacco issue and other things, potentially take this issue out to our city partners throughout Lane County. So just, I think something to think about as an opportunity for us to continue to keep this discussion alive throughout the community, and so the public understands that we are talking about it, we're focusing on it, we have plans in place, and that we're also looking at coordinating with our regional partners to make sure that we respond appropriately for any of these incidences.
I think that'd be a good thing. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And Mr. Mokrahajski, to take that a step further, when I was with Food for Lane County for years, I sat on the FEMA Federal Emergency Management Allocation Board, where FEMA funds in preparation for emergencies were distributed. And for instance, the food money that FEMA distributes goes to Food for Lane County. So Food for Lane County has an emergency plan in case of a broad spread emergency. And while food isn't the immediate emergency, it certainly is one that would surface during the 2 to 3 months of lack of electricity or whatever services are lacking. So when we do have that discussion among jurisdictions, we need to bear in mind that there are also emergency plans that are in place that people would be asking us about as the emergency progresses. So it's a large and a broad spread emergency response plan that is in place in Lane County and in the state. So the better we coordinate and the better we understand it, the better equipped we would be to answer the question should the questions begin to arise.
Any other further questions for Ms. Cook? Well, thank you for the update, and we'll be seeing you in August, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time on this subject.
So, jumping back a little, county administration announcements. Mr. Mokrahajski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, I just have a few brief announcements, and I'll invite Devin Ashbridge to come up here for a moment. I just wanted to, all of the commissioners I know have met Devin, but I want to take a minute to formally introduce her to you and to those who are watching here. Devin has been with us now for about 3 weeks, and I think she's had a pretty good 3 weeks because I've been gone for at least 2 of them. So it's given her an opportunity to sort of, I think, meet folks and get around the organization and start getting acquainted here. But I think, as all of you know, Devin comes to us from the Springfield School District, where she was a communications leader for the past 8 years. Prior to that, she worked for a private communications firm here in Lane County. She's a graduate of the University of Oregon with a degree in public relations and business administration, an honors student, I would add, incidentally to that. And she was instrumental in a number of initiatives at the Springfield School District. I'll share them because I don't know that she will share them with you, but the Gifted Literacy Program, and Commissioner Lycan is familiar with. She's actively involved in the United Front efforts, so she has an understanding and appreciation for both state and federal legislative issues and processes. Mr. Kyler is very excited about that background and knowledge that she brings to the table. She was instrumental in forming the key communicator group, the Team Springfield efforts, and really looking at who their stakeholders in Springfield are. I was really interested in the effort that they went forward with in 2013, the bond measure that failed. It was a capital bond measure for improvements in the school district. It failed, and failures can be difficult on measures like that, but they came back the following year and I think dusted themselves off, and Devin was a key part of this, recalibrated their effort, went out to the community, listened to the community about what didn't go right there, proposed a new measure in 2014, and it was successful and actually generates additional funding than the original bond measure in 2013. So I have a great deal of respect for the work that they did in learning from the mistake and then coming back and following it up with a success. As I talked to a number of folks in Springfield, the former Nancy Golden, who's a former superintendent, and the current board chair, and other folks in Springfield, I heard a consistent message about values and character and calm professionalism, as well as her technical expertise and prowess in the communications realm. So we're really excited to have Devin on board. She comes to us after a lengthy process. We actually did 2 different national recruitment efforts. So we cast a wide net. In the first round, we had a number of wonderful candidates, but we just didn't find the person that we were looking for, and we didn't want to settle. And so we went back out, and I spent a significant amount of time networking in the community and trying to understand who's out there, who are the good people that we have locally. Devin was one of those people that I was connected with and that I encouraged to apply, and we had a competitive process and had a great pool again in the second round, and Devin rose to the top of that after a series of interviews and panels and meet and greets that we held. So we're excited to have her on our team and to continue. I think we have a great message here in Lane County. So really our task is to find all the different avenues to communicate the honest and factual and objective message that we have about the quality services we provide, about the outstanding workforce that we have here that's dedicated. We'd like a larger workforce than we have to provide more services to the community, certainly, but we have a workforce that is dedicated and doing great, providing great services with the limited resources that we have. And so Devin is going to be a key part of that effort, and I just wanted to introduce her here to you today and welcome her to our organization and look forward to great things to come. And I don't know if you have anything to say or any comments or questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrzycki, Chair Bozovich, and Commissioners. It's been a great 3 weeks getting to know Lane County and the organization. I think I was a little lucky that Mr. Mokrzycki was out. It gave me a bit of time to start to get to know each of you and some of the services the county offers. And so it's been wonderful to meet far and wide everyone I've met here at the county, whether it was out at Waste Management, where I was fortunate enough to receive a tour and get some information, our Assessment and Taxation Department. There's just an enthusiasm and dedication among the staff here for the work that they do and the fact that they're doing it on behalf of citizens of Lane County. So it's wonderful to be a part of an organization that has that level of care and compassion for their work.
Thank you, and welcome again.
Thank you.
And I will just say, as we've talked about with the board, we will continue our efforts to provide open and transparent communications with the community and make sure that we are responsive and engaging with our residents. We're also going to have a redoubling of efforts on improving internal communications with our employees. We know that we have a lot of opportunity to better communicate with our large workforce in the organization. And capture the stories about what we're doing and communicate them with the public, so we look forward to all of that. The other 2 things I just wanted to provide quickly, a couple weeks ago I had an opportunity. One of the reasons I was out was because I was in Bend at the Oregon City County Management Association, and this is the state, my peers in city and county management throughout the state of Oregon, and it was a great opportunity to connect not only with about half of the city managers in Lane County were there, and we had an opportunity to get together on a couple of occasions and meet as a group and talk about issues, and I engaged individually with a number of folks about issues, and we're going to follow up, had a lengthy conversation with the new city manager in Florence, and we're going to have some follow-up discussions there and talk with a number of other folks. Also had an opportunity to engage with some county administrators who were in attendance throughout the state, as well as some other city managers. Some good topics there, and I think one of the other things that we're going to have a focus on in the next year is improving Lane County's profile at the state level on a number of fronts, making sure that in addition to commissioners that are actively involved in being in Salem during the legislative session, that we also have staff and other leaders in the organization that are actively participating in the legislative process, and that we're at forums like this, the Oregon City County Management Association. Mr. Dingle talked about the Oregon City and County Council Association. So we're going to have a focus on that and making sure that as we continue to improve our organization and our community, that we're also engaging statewide on issues and learning from what our peers are doing there. So it was a great, just want to share that with the board, that it was a great opportunity to continue to network and communicate and learn statewide with our peers. And finally, I wanted to just provide a comment about the rest stop discussion that was mentioned this morning. We had a meeting yesterday, and we have another meeting scheduled today that we pulled together quickly as the date for the county's two rest stops, or the two rest stops at county property, are going to be closed in mid-August. We're a few weeks away from, I think, around 15 days away from those closing, that we're actively coordinating. I believe that we found about half of the residents. We've gotten them connected. We had an open house and a fair with services that was conducted 2 weeks ago, and about half of the residents at the rest stops, at the county's two rest stops, have been connected to services and provided access to other housing opportunities. But we're looking for around approximately 15 to accommodate approximately 15 of those residents. And so we're having those discussions. I share the concern about the Lane Event Center and the use of that facility. I also don't think that it's under the city's ordinance, even though it's county property and we may or may not be subject to the city's ordinance. I think we want to be mindful of respecting the ordinance they have in place. The event center does not meet the criteria that the city's established in their ordinance for rest stops. So there are other constraints that exist there, but we are looking at other properties to try and meet that need on a temporary basis. We're meeting again today. I just wanted to share with the board that we're having those discussions in doing everything we can to serve the homeless population in our community. And I'll provide you further updates on that. That's all I have for now, and unless you have any other questions for me.
Any questions for Mr. Mokrzycki? See none, then we'll move on to Commissioner's business announcements. Any announcements from the board? Commissioner Stewart.
Just would like to remind everybody that Lane County Fair opens up tomorrow, and the Senior Day is Thursday. So hopefully all of us commissioners can be there to help serve ice cream and cake.
Any other announcements? Then we'll move on to agenda team requests and work session requests. Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As you know, we sent off a request to extend, ask the BLM to extend the comment period for the resource management plan. That request has been honored and extended an additional 30 days to August 21st. I would like to ask the board if the agenda team could work to try to schedule Chris Cadwell. He's a former BLM employee, career employee there with the BLM, specialized in modeling. He has analyzed the different BLM RMP proposed plans, and I'd like to see if we could have him give a presentation on that. That might help us formulate some comments that we might want to submit to the BLM in regards to the preferred alternative for the resource management plan.
Is there support from the board for presentation from Mr. Caldwell?
Yes.
It looks like we have head nods from Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Lycan and myself, and you actually took one of the things off my list.
Thank you.
Along with that, I think we need to have a follow-up agenda item to take action as a board on our to submit a set of comments from the board to BLM. So there may be a follow-up activity, but I guess maybe we'll discuss that once Mr. Caldwell presents to us. I had an item I'd like to think about maybe for even the August 4th meeting, at least to have a discussion, or at least see if there's board support for discussion on looking at other methods of providing revenue for our road fund. The vehicle registration fee was defeated fairly soundly. Lots of reasons why we heard, that our polling data was so far off. It didn't delve deep enough into the fairness issue. The one thing I heard as I went out and talked to the community was, we understand the need for the revenue, we support road maintenance, but you should have done a gas tax instead. It's fair. And I heard that over and over and over again. You should have done a gas tax. This isn't fair. I own multiple cars. I don't drive them all the time, or I'm on a fixed income, and I have to pay the same thing as the person that drives, 20,000 miles annually. Those sort of fairness issues. I was wondering if there's support from the board to look at whether or not we want to, and I'm not saying we should, think about placing something on the November ballot or not. We've got a very short window to do that, and if we don't at least discuss it by August 4th, I think we'll miss that window. We're looking at the state failure to take action on a transportation plan. I think if we decided to do a gas tax, which would be more fair, we could write into it some revenue sharing with the cities, and because it's not statutory, we could write the formula for that revenue sharing to be a little bit more fair than the pure population formula, maybe something that's done by lane miles. And then also at the same time, we could write into the measure maybe some automatic reductions in the county gas tax if a state gas tax is passed subsequently later. So those sort of things that could be written into a measure that might make it much more palatable to the public. But we're looking at not only the huge cuts we made this budget year, but we're looking at additional cuts next year in the road fund because of our lack of revenue. And at the same time, we're allowing a $6 billion asset, which is going to be critical in emergency preparedness that we spent a good portion of our morning talking about in the future. So I think it's an item that we should at least discuss as a board in the future, and I'm just looking to see if there's enough support for the board to bring that forward. Commissioner Sorensen.
I would support having a briefing on the topic of gas taxes, local gas taxes, county gas taxes, get information. I'm not sure I would jump to the final conclusion of it, but I certainly would think that if we could get together some information, it would help us and the public. It would also help move the organization to think about the future rather than on the most recent past. And I would like to see the discussion. As far as committing today to putting something on a ballot, I probably would say no. I'd like to see the discussion ahead of that.
Yeah, that's my intent. We need to have the discussion first, but we need to do it relatively quickly. Is there any other folks that support the idea of having a discussion? I'm not seeing 3 head nods, so we won't put that on the agenda item list. I think it's unfortunate, but... And then the second item I was going to look at was, and this may be already being built in, but there was a lot of discussion at budget time about starting an early process in the budget and bringing the leadership team together to start that discussion. We are looking at further cuts in our road department and $7 million shortfall projected in the general fund. Is that already scheduled for the board to start and the leadership team to start those discussions, or do we need to have 3 head nods to get that going?
Mr. Chair, we have not scheduled a leadership meeting. I'm just trying to think whether or not we need 3 head nods. We did talk about that, I believe, 3 weeks ago, and that was actually identified as a goal. I don't have it in front of me, but as a goal for the county administrator. When you did my annual evaluation, the board identified a number of goals for the next year, and that was one of the items specifically that we talked about. So I feel comfortable, unless the majority of the board does not feel comfortable with us moving forward, bringing that to the board. I guess the question I'd have is there a specific time frame that you would like to see that? I believe typically we do the leadership team meeting in January, So, potentially I would say something in the September, October timeframe. I'd like to have if we're going to have a leadership team meeting, that we have the opportunity to pull together the most recent data. We're doing a lot of work right now on the health insurance side, as you know. We have an RFP out for the opening of a on-site employee clinic. We're shifting to the self-funded health insurance model as of August 1st, so there's a lot of work going on that. I'd like to have August to pull that, do that work, and then pull together any revised cost estimates that we may be able to generate. So September potentially.
So my only caution is, we also have the 10-year public safety plan that's working in the background. We have a desperate need for some kind of support in our public safety system. $7 million worth of cuts, we actually need $7 million of additional revenue. Would be a lot better situation to be talking about. If we are going to plan something for a possible May ballot to take care of that public safety side, and we need to do polling and stuff like that, if those options are part of what the leadership team might be discussing, waiting till October may be too late to get that done in time to hit the calendar in January, February, when we would have to be making the ballot measure decisions and having ballot measure language ready and understanding what the community will support. We're in a situation now where we lost basically $4 million worth of revenue this biennium because of our lack of prosecution services. Our percentage of folks under supervision relative to the rest of the state has slipped from over 10% to just over 8%. Every time we don't take further action on shoring up our public safety system, it's just in this tailspin that we're, 24-hour patrol is on the chopping blocks in this next, budget cut cycle. More, prosecutors are on the chopping block, and it has this downstream impact of community corrections and justice reinvestment program funding, on the downstream side. We've lost more money in that grant funding than we made up by making the cuts on those positions in prosecution. So we need to start that conversation relatively soon. I'm kind of sorry we're not also starting it on the road fund side, but I understand the reluctance after the thrashing we took. It's unfortunate, though, because we spent a good 6 months to a year educating the public about roads, and they understand well the maintenance needs now and the need financially for additional revenue. They just didn't like what we proposed to do that. So we need to start those discussions sooner rather than later, and it's my feeling, and I don't know what the rest of the board feels. But I do agree, though, we want to wait till we have some good information to discuss. I don't want to just start a meeting just to have a meeting. Commissioner Farr.
Mr. Chair, we added agenda team requests as an item on the regular agenda last year during my term as the chair. And just a reminder, something you have the prerogative of the chair to bring anything forward to the agenda that is at your discretion.
Yeah. But no sense in discussing something in staff time over something that I can't even get 3 head nods.
Understood.
So it's dead. So is there any other business for the board today or additional agenda team requests? Then we'll go to review of assignments.
The request to bring Chris Caldwell and a presentation update on the BLM comments for the resource management plan. So we will schedule that. Obviously, the under 7B, the direction that the board provided, and I believe that we're scheduling that for August. I have to look and see, 14th or 18th. I can't remember was the earliest that we could bring that August 18th. So we'll schedule the emergency declarations to come back to the board on August 18th under the direction of the board. And then the last request here related to the leadership team meeting, we did have that discussion, so I'm comfortable that we had that discussion previously. I believe my goals are scheduled to come back to the board November 10th, but I didn't hear any disagreement with what was originally discussed a few weeks ago on that. So I think I'll have a discussion with our staff about a leadership team meeting, and I'm thinking maybe in early, we'll try to pull it together for early September. I think we could do that and have a meaningful discussion with updated projections at that time, unless there's any objection.
Everybody, did he capture everything pretty well? Very good, then. Then we'll move on into executive session, which will be held upstairs in the Board of Commissioners conference room in about 5 minutes. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192-6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. We do reserve the right to come back out in public session should the need arise, but I'm not projecting that, so we will most likely adjourn from executive session. We are recessed.